Hello and welcome. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. You are watching W News. Broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters, these are our top stories. At least 9 people have been killed in tornadoes after Hurricane Milton makes landfall in Florida. An Israeli airstrike kills at least 28 people and wounds dozens of others, sheltering at a school in Deir el-Balah in central Gaza. Israel's Air Force killed 5 paramedics after striking a civil defense emergency center in the southern village of Deir Haya. And Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu considers retaliation following last week's attack by Iran. Welcome. Well, we do start in the US, where Hurricane Milton continues to wreak havoc across Florida. At least 4 people, or the count has now been updated to 9. At least 9 people have been killed in tornadoes that hit the East Coast. Hurricane-force winds continue to batter communities that are just starting to recover from Hurricane Helene, which only hit 2 weeks ago. Some areas are experiencing rainfall levels that occur only once in 1,000 years. Governor Ron DeSantis saying more flooding is expected in coming days. While Milton is moving into the Atlantic, it is expected to continue to bring hurricane-force winds and heavy rain. Here is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis updating the media earlier.
We had over 80,000 people that were into shelters overnight as the storm hit the state. We will better understand the extent of the damage as the day progresses. And you have people that are out there assessing damage right now. First responders have been working all through the night to help people who were in distress. And what we can say is the storm was significant, but thankfully this was not the worst case scenario.
Well, the mayor of Tampa, where the hurricane made landfall, warned residents to stay indoors while rescue crews were assessing the damage.
Please, please stay inside. Stay inside until we can get out there with our teams. They are all in action right now. Don't go through standing water, and make sure if you see any trees or wires down, call and report those, and we will get them fixed as quickly as we can.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined from St. Petersburg, Florida, by the Weather Network presenter and former co-host of the Storm Chasers, Mark Robinson. Mark, you spoke to my colleague Tom on this show yesterday from the start of the winds. Tell us what it was like.
Yeah, it was one of the, it was very, it's almost hard to describe because it started off very slow, not too much going on. We moved down to Sarasota as the winds began to ramp up. We got to Sarasota, and the winds, we got hit by the outer bands, got quiet, and then we started to get hit by the inner bands. And then as darkness fell, it began to just die off completely as the eye began to pass over us. In fact, the storm made landfall almost directly over top of us. And that point, everything got very ominous, quiet, and then the backside, the rear part of the eye wall hit us. That was much more powerful than the other side. So the winds were ramped up to 150 kilometers an hour, maybe even more than that. We just watched as the power outages, power flashes were happening across Sarasota, and of course debris flying, surge coming in. It just all happened very, very quickly on the backside of the storm, which isn't always the strongest, but in this case, it happened to be the strongest part of the storm.
Dramatic stuff, Mark, although looking at the situation now, I see blue skies behind you. So is it all calm?
Yeah, I mean, this is St. Petersburg. This was one of the areas that we feared was going to be hit by the storm surge. And it could have been 15 feet of storm surge into Tampa Bay and, of course, into St. Petersburg area. Instead, what happened was the eye went a little bit south, so it drove that surge into areas like Punta Gorda, Port Charlotte, and where we were in Sarasota. But here, and I want to show you sort of behind me, you can actually see the stadium with the missing roof. That's Tropicana Field, where the roof was removed because of the winds. So this area really took the brunt of the winds and the rain. So tremendous amount of flooding throughout the city, throughout Tampa. And what we've been seeing as we've sort of been taking a look, is very widespread damage, but not, the huge damage that could have happened. But there are a few significant spots here and there, and the stadium behind me is one of those significant spots.
Look, how did the storm end up comparing to expectations? Because climate skeptics out there today saying that it was all overblown.
Well, you know what? The whole thing is, yes, it was not as bad as we were expecting, but that is a very, very good thing because the potential for catastrophic damage was there. And that would have been 15 feet of storm surge into Tampa Bay, into Tampa. I'm very happy that didn't hit the way it did. But the hurricane itself absolutely was as strong as we expected. It just didn't push the surge into the place that could have turned this from a major disaster to a gargantuan disaster.
In terms of what's happening now, are there further concerns about more storms this season?
That is the billion-dollar question. It's one that I've been answering. Being a meteorologist, I've been looking at the long-range models. And one of the things that we've seen this year is that we've had a back ending of the hurricane season. When we were supposed to have the most hurricanes, we had none. Now that we're getting sort of into the back, the latter part of the season, we're now getting all of our hurricanes. So it is entirely possible that it will happen. And, my home country, Canada, we often see storms at this time of the year. And so we're now watching for hurricanes on our East Coast. So they're not as strong as the ones down here, but they can definitely do damage. And that's something that we're paying attention to.
Really good to get the roundup from you again. Weather Network presenter and former co-host of the Storm Chasers, Mark Robinson.
Thank you.
Let's get some more on this now with our correspondent Nick Harper standing by in Washington, D.C. Nick, good to see you. And as we know, Washington, D.C. very far from Florida. But let's talk to you about the political reaction to this. President Biden's reportedly been speaking with Florida Governor DeSantis just in the last sort of hour or so. How did that go?
That's right, yeah, the two of them getting on a phone call first thing this morning, as well as President Biden getting updates during the course of the day, also reportedly huddling in the Situation Room at the White House to get the latest update from officials, including the Disaster Recovery Agency here in the US, FEMA. I think part of this is really all about President Biden trying to show himself in a position of strength after a couple of weeks of attacks from the Republicans, suggesting that the federal government simply hasn't done enough to help all of those affected by Hurricane Helene that hit just under 2 weeks ago. So trying to get out in front of this, showing that he's working with the Republicans, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, and showing that the federal government is doing as much as possible, not just to help those people affected across multiple states by Hurricane Helene, but those who are now having to deal with the damage of Hurricane Milton in Florida. Because remember, by extension, his Vice President, Kamala Harris, who's running for the presidency, will get judged on how all of these recovery response efforts from the government go over the next few weeks until we run up until November the 5th, Election Day.
Indeed, they will be held to task for that. So what is the scale of the rescue efforts off the back of Milton so far? Do we have a sense of how much funding there is, what authorities are being involved?
Well, at this stage, Biden is saying quite simply he is there for the people of Florida and the federal government intends to do everything that they possibly can. We know that they pre-positioned a number of National Guard down there. The Pentagon also sending reserve troops in the region of about 1,500 to the state ahead of the storm hitting. But part of the issue now is the potential for mounting costs. There are already estimates that in terms of insurance losses, this could run into around $100 billion that insurance companies would need to pay up. Now, the problem with Florida is that many insurance companies quite simply don't want to touch the state. It's very difficult for businesses, for homeowners there to get insurance, and they often rely on local insurance companies who perhaps then don't pay up for the losses that are incurred as a result of these hurricanes. But the federal government has sent many people down there. It says that that it will continue to send people down there and continue to help with those rebuilding efforts. But quite simply, for the homeowners who've had roofs ripped off homes, that will be down to them to have to cover, even though the government is there standing by, ready to provide shelter in the short term and food and water if they need it.
Now, as you pointed out, is the final days of the Biden administration. So what is happening in the election race? While all eyes are on that storm, there must be plenty going on with Harris and Trump.
Well, there is. They had to cancel a couple of their events over the course of the last few days, but they are still campaigning. And interestingly, overnight we had a new poll come out, the Reuters Ipsos poll, important because it showed really what the situation is when it comes to middle America. It zoomed in on suburban voters. It showed that Kamala Harris has now pulled ahead of Donald Trump. She is now leading him 47% to 41% amongst suburban voters. And then the snapshot on middle-income household shows that she's also leading Trump at 45 to 43%. This is important because suburbanites make up about half of the US electorate, and it is an important voting bloc that Joe Biden won over in 2020. He beat out Trump by about 6% amongst suburbanites, but had lost support considerably during his time in office. Before he dropped out, he was trailing Donald Trump by a long margin. Now, of course, we have Kamala Harris in the race, and she's been able to turn that deficit around, now leading him by a much larger margin. But of course, it always just comes down to those swing states. There's 7 of them this time around. And this Reuters Ipsos poll quite simply showed that it is still too close to call in the majority of those states. Really not much room between the two of them, between Trump and between Harris.
And Nick, speaking of voters, North Carolina lawmakers passing legislation today that is supposedly going to make it easier for those residents affected by Hurricane Helene to vote. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right, Rosanna. This is something that was passed unanimously in North Carolina. It's really about trying to help the people there who've been affected by Hurricane Helene, to give them more flexibility when it comes to voting. So they've outlined a number of measures, really trying to help those people who perhaps are no longer living in the residence where their voting card is tied to. So if they're in a temporary accommodation, if they're staying with friends and family, if they're even staying outside of the state of North Carolina, they will still have the opportunity to vote. And they're trying to extend the ability for people to send in mail-in ballots, and as well as that, changing rules around early voting, voting at voting sites, and also trying to recruit additional poll workers. The question, of course, is, with all of these new rules being put in so close to the election, if there are any problems with the results, if Donald Trump, say, doesn't win the state of North Carolina, is he going to cry foul? Will he suggest that there have been voting irregularities, things being put in place to prevent Republicans from voting? Of course, the idea behind this is that it makes it easier for all voters, Democrats and Republicans, to cast their ballot. But it does perhaps create some problems further down the line if there are some results that perhaps one candidate or the other doesn't like the look of.
Our correspondent Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. Thank you. To some news from around the world now. Russia now dismissing reports North Korea sent military personnel to fight in its war in Ukraine. The Kremlin spokesperson calling it fake news. This after South Korea said there was a, quote, high possibility North Korea could deploy troops to support Russia in its over 2-year-long war. French President Emmanuel Macron will hold talks with Ukraine's President Zelensky in Paris later today. The visit comes as part of the Ukrainian leader's 48-hour trip to Europe. Air defence is at the top of his agenda as the president hopes to increase support for his country's fight against Russia. Zelensky will visit London, Paris, Rome and Berlin, shoring up Western support ahead of the consequential US elections next month. Meantime, China saying it will work with Pakistan to protect its citizens working in the country. This after 2 Chinese engineers died in a separatist group attack on Sunday. China has previously asked Pakistan to increase its security measures. To Lebanon now, where officials say 5 paramedics have been killed after an airstrike hit a civil defence emergency centre in the southern village of Dirghaya. Overnight, airstrikes killed at least 5 people in central Lebanon's Mount Lebanon governorate. In Beirut's southern suburbs, 2 additional strikes were also reported. The Israeli military says it has killed 2 Hezbollah commanders, Ahmed Mustafa al-Hajj Ali and Mohammed Ali Hamdan, during an operation in southern Lebanon. Additionally, Israel claimed to have bombed weapons warehouses in Beirut and military infrastructure in southern Lebanon. Now this comes as the Israeli military says approximately 40 rockets were fired from Lebanon towards northern Israel's Upper Galilee. I'm joined now by Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute, Faras Maksad. Good of you to make time for us. And let's talk for a moment about the UN peacekeepers, UNFIL, because Israeli attacks on several UNFIL bases in the Blue Zone in southern Lebanon today have apparently left 2 UN peacekeepers wounded. Will that news make any impact?
Yes, I think so. It's been a long-standing Israeli demand that UNIFIL get out of the way. Given the topography of South Lebanon, the Israeli ability to commence ground incursions is very limited by that topography. And so having a large UNIFIL footprint is a nuisance for the Israelis. And I think we just heard the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations ask that UNIFIL now be completely pushed out of that border area, some 5 kilometers, so that the IDF can operate more freely. So I do think that those kind of attacks are premeditated and are an attempt by the Israeli military to push UNIFIL out of that area, as very explicitly stated now by their ambassador at the United Nations.
So an actual active part of their strategy, potentially, is what you're saying. Let's also talk about some other sort of urges we've had or calls, because Benjamin Netanyahu on Wednesday speaking to Joe Biden, that was yesterday in this call, but he asked Biden that the need to minimise harm to civilians, in particular in the densely populated areas of Beirut. I'm sure those words would be welcome in Lebanon, but will it make a difference?
Well, we don't know yet is the honest answer. There's clearly an American green light for this operation. It wasn't the case earlier, but the American position is not static. It's been dynamic. It's been changing. And I think when the administration saw these Israeli successes in serving significant blows to Hezbollah's leadership time and again, culminating with the assassination of Nasrallah, they have decided to allow Israel more leeway to degrade Hezbollah, degrade Iran's influence in Lebanon. Now, that said, the administration has also tried to put some parameters for the Israeli military in Lebanon. So no to attacking Lebanese state authority and the Lebanese army. No to attacking the Beirut International Airport to allow the continuation of evacuation efforts from there. So there are some parameters that the administration is trying to place on Israel, but we all know that the status of the relationship between the Israeli prime minister and the American president is a fraught one, and one where right now the Israelis feel that they can have some leeway given the upcoming U.S. elections.
Yeah, fraught is the word that comes to mind from a lot of the interviews I've had this week about that US-Israel relationship. Is it the case now then that Netanyahu is acting completely without care, if you like, for any of the allies' wishes, or particularly from Israel, from the US?
I think it's safe to say that Netanyahu is very much in the driver's seat. Certainly the U.S. has leverage. It is Israel's most important ally, the number one source of its military supplies and armament. Israel simply cannot continue fighting without the United States. But that said, there's clearly an absence of political will to exercise that leverage here. At least we haven't seen it yet. And in a tightly contested presidential election where Israel is a domestic issue, domestic consideration for both parties, I think Benjamin Netanyahu, who understands American politics better than most, also understands that he's got a free hand now. From now, possibly until November 5th, depending on what the results are, but also possibly until January 20th, until a new administration is sworn in.
And look, another really interesting report from the last 24 hours or so is that the Biden administration have been trying at least to push for new elections in Lebanon, if they can, to elect a new president. To viewers who aren't aware, there's a sort of caretaker government, if you like. The government hasn't been able to be formed properly in the last couple of months. What do you make of that? Do you think that will have any influence at all? Do you think it's even possible right now in Lebanon for there to be a government formed?
The election of a president in Lebanon has been a long-standing American, Arab, and Lebanese demand. It is constitutionally mandated, and the post has been vacant now for 2 years. Now, that said, the White House has been much more focused on what they consider to be strategic priorities in Lebanon rather than the election of the president. And so that means the White House has been focused on a new security arrangement for South Lebanon in relation to Israel, the implementation of a ceasefire, and then that demarcation of that land border. The State Department, however, has been much more interested in trying to find a pathway towards the election of that president. And I don't think that reality has changed. The American position wants to see an election of the president, but in terms of strategic priorities at the White House, they're much more focused on a ceasefire and a new security arrangement right now.
And just reminding ourselves what Israel claims its objectives to be in Lebanon, why it's there and what it's doing. It says it's there to try and, get the residents of northern Israel back to their homes. That was the initial stated objective. But the other one is to remove Hezbollah from the region. I appreciate this isn't a short answer, but do you think that is going to be possible?
Well, thank you for that question. I wrote an article about 2 weeks ago for Time magazine, very much underscoring that the stated objective of the operation, which is to return some 60,000 Israelis to their homes in the north, isn't really the overriding objective. Just as was the case in Gaza, the hostages, the return of the Israeli hostages is an objective. It's not the objective. The objective here for Benjamin Netanyahu is to readdress the balance of power in the region vis-a-vis Iran, whether it is the Iranian proxies in Gaza, Hamas, or it is the crown jewel in Lebanon, Hezbollah, or even the various militias and logistical support bases in Syria and Iraq. And now we're talking about a direct Iranian-Israeli confrontation. So this is much broader than the stated objective of returning some 60,000 Israelis to the north. This is about reshaping the region in Israel's favor. Clearly, the Israeli prime minister now senses the opportunity, given the situation in the White House and the absence here in Washington, D.C.
And just finally, look, Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant warning its next strike on Iran, and we are expecting some sort of anticipated retaliation. They're saying it will be, quote, deadly, precise and surprising. What did you read from that?
I would expect them to say that, but honestly, my reading is that this might be a multi-layered, multi-staged response. Clearly, there's a very strong American aversion to any Israeli strike that would target Iranian nuclear facilities or even the oil infrastructure, for the impact that that would have, not only on U.S. forces in the region, potentially in an Iranian response, but also on the global economy, given the price of oil. This is also to underscore, and one should note, that Israel does not have the military capability to significantly degrade or take on Iran's nuclear infrastructure without U.S. assistance. So I really do think that the perhaps Israeli play here is a multi-stage operation. Perhaps the first stage will focus on military sites, the IRGC, the deeply unpopular Basij that are responsible for the repression within Iran, to see what kind of impact that will have. That will then generate an Iranian response for sure, which can then also allow for a stage 2 Israeli operation. And then all bets are off.
Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute, Firas Maksad, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
To some business news now. Pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline saying it will pay up to $2.2 billion to settle thousands of US lawsuits claiming its discontinued heartburn drug Zantac caused cancer. The company reaching agreements with 10 law firms representing around 80,000 claimants. Elon Musk's expected to unveil a prototype of Tesla's long-awaited robo-taxi, the Cybercab, in the next few hours. The project's faced delays and criticism over the past few months, with some analysts believing it distracts from Tesla's focus on developing more affordable electric vehicles. And Indian business tycoon Ratan Tata has passed away aged 86. The trailblazing Indian figure is best known for making large acquisitions, including buying the British tea firm Tetley in 2000 and the Anglo-Dutch steelmaker Chorus in 2007. Let's also take a look at some sports news now, shall we? Spanish tennis legend Rafael Nadal retiring from the sport, aged 38. The Davis Cup in November will be his last professional play. He holds 22 Grand Slam singles titles. British cyclist Mark Cavendish's final professional race will be the two-day Tour de France Criterium in Singapore next month. Organisers have announced the event will mark the end of his remarkable career, spanning an impressive 165 race wins. In golf, Rory McIlroy and Scottie Scheffler will compete in an exhibition match against Bryson DeChambeau and Brooks Koepka in Las Vegas in December. This 18-hole challenge will feature two top-ranked PGA Tour players facing off against two stars from the LIV Golf Series. Returning to the Middle East and to Gaza now, where at least 28 Palestinians have been killed in airstrikes while sheltering in a school. The Israeli military claims Hamas fighters were operating within the compound of the school when it was hit. Well, this all comes as an initial release from an investigation from the United Nations claims Israel is seeking to destroy Gaza. For more on all this, I'm joined now from Cairo by Dr. Ahmed Moghrabi, who was a surgeon at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis in Gaza until April this year. Thank you very much for joining us. And I want to focus with you, if you don't mind, Dr. Ahmed, on the healthcare system in Gaza. The UN inquiry today saying that Israel is deliberately destroying Gaza's healthcare system, and this could amount to a war crime. Did this reflect what you saw?
Exactly. You know, myself, I used to be a head of plastic and burn department at Nasser Hospital. I worked there till the invasion of the IDF to the hospital. I mean, to the Nasser Hospital, mid of February. So the health system actually is being destructed systematically. You know, if you remember, that was started in Al Shifa Hospital on October. Then the IDF, I don't know, actually, they are targeting all hospitals. Al Shifa Hospital, Nasser Hospital, many medical points in Gaza already have been targeted. If you look even at schools, at universities, at mosques, churches, actually there are no red lines. They are targeting everything in Gaza, not only hospitals.
The UN's inquiry also accusing Israeli forces of deliberately killing and torturing medical personnel. Does that also reflect what you saw?
Exactly. The ex head of department at Nasser Hospital, actually before I came, the head of the department, Dr. Hassan Hamdan, actually they killed him with the entire family. Actually now he used to be like 63 years old, you know, and they targeted him and they killed him. He's a plastic surgeon, and everybody knows about the murder at the IDF prison, Dr. Adnan El-Borsh, and many of our colleagues that we don't know the fate of our medical colleagues. I remember when the IDF invaded the Nasser Hospital, they arrested the whole medical team there. Everybody they arrested. Because, you know, the medical personnel at Nasser Hospital used to be like 20% of the medical personnel who remained at Nasser Hospital. 80% actually evacuated before the siege of the hospital. They arrested and detained the 20% of the medical personnel actually who remained at Nasser Hospital. Until now, many of them, they are inside the IDF prison. Till now, we are speaking now, and they are inside the prison, or we don't know the fate of our medical colleagues.
Why do you think the Israeli forces are targeting hospitals per the UN's inquiry?
Exactly. Actually, this question, every time when I was in Gaza, I used to ask everybody. I used to be a consultant for MSF organization, if you know this organization, MSF France. I used to be a consultant. there, and I asked them the same question: why they are targeting surgeons, mainly surgeons? What is the problem between us and the IDF? Actually, I don't have the exact question. I don't have, really, there is no exact answer for why they are targeting doctors. Maybe they think that we are, maybe somebody of us already treated some of hostages at the hospital. But although actually we are saving lives, we are as surgeons or as a doctors, we are saving lives. So why they are arresting us, why they are killing us, nobody knows. Really, I don't have an answer for this question.
Do you have?
Why they are targeting the medical?
Do you have any confidence that should it be alleged that there has been a war crime or a crime against humanity happening, as the UN inquiry has suggested, that there will be charges brought against the Israeli military? Do you think that will happen?
I think yes. What is going on, on the ground, it is a real genocide. It is a genocide. Invading hospitals, it is a genocide. If you invade the hospital without killing anybody or execution anybody, it is a genocide. So what do you think? Targeting and destroying hospitals, even international organizations. Everybody saw the central kitchen, what happened with them. Everybody heard about targeting the NGOs' buildings. Like MSF shelter, they targeted the MSF shelter. Actually, there is no red lines. They are targeting everything, everybody. So I think this is a real genocide, what is going on.
It's very good of you to make time to speak to us and share your experience of Gaza. Dr. Ahmed Moghrabi, who was a surgeon at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis in Gaza. Let's get a reminder now of our top stories. At least 9 people have been killed in tornadoes after Hurricane Milton made landfall in Florida. Israeli airstrikes kill at least 28 people and wound dozens of others, sheltering at a school in Deir al-Balah in central Gaza. And in Lebanon, 5 paramedics have been killed after airstrikes hit a civil defense emergency center in the southern village of Dir Haya. Meanwhile, Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu is tonight considering retaliation to last week's attack by Iran. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is Hadley Gamble's interview with NE CEO Claudio Descalzi. And at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, join Tom Burges Watson for Global News Today. Goodbye.
Claudio Descalzi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
I want to kick off by getting your assessment of what's happening in energy markets today.
Energy markets. So what is happening, I don't really know, I understand, because it's happening every day, something new and it's very volatile. What we know that from a physical point of view, we have a demand that is increasing, not at the pace that we thought. So when we talk about price, we have to consider clearly the basics, so the demand and the supply. And what we see that demand is growing. At the moment, we are about 103 million barrels per day of demand, and in 2025, 104 million barrels per day. So the demand is there, and the supply in terms of investment for the upstream, we are approaching again $80 per barrel, and that unfortunately because of what is happening in the Middle East. So the market is not really, we cannot really forecast or foresee what is happening. Also the forward curves are changing every day based on the actual price. So I think in any case that the demand is there. So if you look at the demand, maybe it's not impacting the short term, but the medium long term for sure is there, and is not changing. The demography is there as well. And if you consider that in the last 20 years, the demand increase of 50% is huge, and it's still on average based on more than 80% on fossil fuels, where coal is still the first in electricity production. Though, so that element are very strong and are there, and for sure the demography and the new consumption of artificial intelligence or big data center that consume a lot. As you know, as a reference, Google and Microsoft consume in 2023 more than Nigeria is a country of 70, 80 million people. So this new component is going to impact the market and the energy consumption.
Do you think it's possible we'll see $100 oil before the end of the year?
No, I don't think so, because we are still in a situation where it's not clear what's going to happen with the central banks in Europe in terms of reduction of interest. We saw in the US 50 basis point is huge, so a huge reduction. But I think that we have to understand how the growth is going to happen in China, because China, in any case, represents 25% of the consumption overall, with India as well. But China is an essential component in the industrial and infrastructure, because they have this possibility to use coal in electricity that we don't see, but it's reduced the gas consumption. But in any case, China is increasing coal consumption. That is sure, with new power plant, but also gas is increasing, not as expected, because the growth rate is lower than before, but still the highest.
How dangerous is it, in your mind, when the U.S. president is speculating on the bombing of what could potentially be as much as 3% of the global oil market? And I'm talking about Iran's facilities.
That is dangerous not just for the price. This is dangerous for a worldwide war. So it's dangerous. I don't know. I don't want to enter in a political decision, because it's not my area of competence. I just can't see the result of that. That is a clear, strong statement, strong event. And we see their reaction was not so strong from a price point of view, because if you pass from $74 to $79, $8, that means that, okay, there is some fears. And, you know, they use also algorithms. So these kind of sentences can create in the algorithm the feeling to buy, because...
The electronic trading.
Yeah, algorithm, yes, electronic trading. But that means, so just few dollars means that at the end of the day, the market at the moment does believe that that can happen. That is my feeling. Clearly, there is we have to see now what is happening, not from from this war point of view, but in the market, because we have to understand if this kind of growth continues. If this kind of growth continues, not just because of that, but because of what we said before, there is an imbalance between, from a physical point of view, between supply and demand. But clearly, this kind of sentences, sometimes they create a down in the price, sometimes a high in the price. Clearly, a sentence or a possibility to attack all the Iranian production center for oil and gas clearly is a big statement, and create this kind of reaction. But it's punctual. We have to understand if there is different trend, as I said before, trends are not linked to sentences that at the end of the day are words, but real fact, so industrial fact.
Walk me through something you mentioned earlier, which is artificial intelligence and the impact that's going to have on energy markets. Do you think that governments have an understanding of just how much energy that kind of technology is going to take?
I don't think so. Now there are, at least in Europe, when we talk about institutions talk about artificial intelligence, they talk more about how to regulate it, which kind of policy, which kind of consequences. The energy aspect is not really being touched, and that is a big point, because that is going to, they need a huge amount of energy, but also the new energy vector like green hydrogen, a lot of energy, a lot of water, a lot of renewables, and the growth rate of renewables now is not enough for civilian, for population, for society. If you add these kind of new energy vectors and all the new data center and the artificial intelligence and the quantum computing, that is something that is happening, is going to happen in a large scale. So all these additional energy we need, I think that are not really considered, especially because if you say that the transition is just renewables, that is one component. Absolutely, it's very important. We are, as a company in Eni, we invested a lot, but if you say just renewable, you see that the growth rate is not there, and you continue to insist, that means they are not considering at large what is happening from the industrial point of view.
Yeah. Does this, in your mind, equate a situation where the government, the regulators, aren't factoring in what's going to be necessary going forward to support this industry and to support this transition? Because essentially what they're saying is they're trying to continue on one path, but they're not factoring in how quickly artificial intelligence is going to change the game when it comes to the energy needs.
I think that, this kind of problem are going to happen also without artificial intelligence, without big data center, without the need, just the need of the growing population is just enough to create a big hurdle to this kind of mentality. One is the growing population. Secondly, the fiscal margin that all these countries, also the US, but US is growing, Europe is not growing, it's flat, it's stable. So for new energy, for new vectors, for new solutions, new infrastructure, you need a lot of money. And if you're not looking for the economics or the competitiveness, you need to subsidy everything. It's not possible. It's not possible. That is not factoring. Also, without considering the new sink of energy that we are going to have in the future, I think that this kind of attitude where you think that you can introduce with a clean exit or with a clean exit of the past, a new energy is anachronistic, because what happened in the last 150 years, for coal it took 60 years to reach more or less 50%. Gas in 80 years reached 23%. Oil reached in the same period, 60, 70 years, 40% of the market. So, and it's been bottom up. So, and they has been adding new energy to the previous one without replacing. There is no one energy that has been able to replace the old one. Now, after all this time, with all the infrastructure, habits that is being created by our society, now we have the necessity, I think, because I believe in climate change, I believe that we have to be clean, but I believe also that we have to be clean in a sustainable way, that it means competitiveness, selection of the right technology, considering the cost and considering also the demand. Because all this revolution that has been made by policy, especially policy, never consider the demand. They just consider the supply. Now, I think that everybody is realizing, and has been too dogmatic. And like a faith, like a party, so we are green. Green means industry, means investment, means competencies, means understanding what is the impact for the society. So,
and there's a disconnect in your mind between what's really happening and what people want to happen.
It's disconnected because it became like a political party, like an ideology. You know, when a technology became an ideology, it's not correct. Technology is technology. It's a tool that must give a service to people for their welfare. So I think that without going back to the demand, also without artificial intelligence and all the other IT and development of new vectors, and that we are in a situation where we are in a cul-de-sac. We are in a situation we don't have enough money to follow our dreams. That is a monodimensional dream. There is no the other dimensions, and is a point. And when the point is too small, and it's not easy to achieve.
When I speak to European ministers, most recently in Warsaw, there was a very big conversation revolving around a centralized European energy market. How do you react to that as an industry expert? Is it possible?
I don't know if it's impossible. Is it possible? I don't think that is the only solution or the right solution for Europe. If you think that Europe, so when we do that, we think at competition with the US and China. First of all, when we compare Europe with China and in the US, Europe is not a country. China is a country. They speak the same language, more or less, but they speak Chinese. In the US, they speak Americans or English. In Europe, we have different languages. We have different culture. We have different history. We have different energy mix that is not negligible. Different infrastructure. A single market means that you have to connect not just rules, that is in policy, that is important, but also infrastructure, pipes, and have the same price for storage, for transportation, for everything. And that is led by private company, yes. And if the economic conditions are not correct for a private company, the private company change and goes somewhere else.
Right.
So I think that you have to consider all this. Single market is part of the solution. But if you have a single market and you don't have energy, and you pay energy 3 or 4 or 5 times more than the US and 2 times more than China.
So it's not the answer to bringing prices down?
You can reduce the price, but when the price is 3 or 4 or 5 times, because you don't have the energy, you buy energy outside, you can reduce of 10%, 20%, but remain 2 times, 3 times, in any case more. So it's part of the solution, but it's not the center of the solution.
Yeah. A few years ago, after the invasion of Ukraine, you and I were discussing this. Would we see Russian energy back in the European market? Obviously, the war is still ongoing. In your mind, is Russian energy going to be part of Europe's energy mix in the future?
So I told you again that it's not easy for Russian to go back. Also, if Russian is delivering a lot of gas through pipe, at least, I don't know for how long, because they have to renew. I don't think that is possible, the contract with Ukraine for the pipeline. But LNG is there, at least 20 or more than 20 billion cubic meter per year. So Russia is still giving some gas to Europe. That is, we have to keep in mind that. I don't think that they can go back to 150, 160 billion cubic meter like before, because, you know, market change, and now we buy from the US, we buy from Africa, we buy from Middle East. Investment has been made to feed this gap of gas. So I don't think that if they come back, they can be like before, because there is no space anymore. And we are changing slowly, but we are changing habits and source of energy. Different. Gas is there, still important, maybe more in other countries. Now the gas consumption in Europe is less than before. We were at more than 420 billion. Now we are 330, 340 billion, so there is something. And the market is occupied by other suppliers. And we are changing. Nuclear, for sure, is going to be a possible, maybe the only solution if you want to feed all the data centers, artificial intelligence, and the need of a growing population. So nuclear and renewables, the renewables are growing. I said that they are not enough, but they are growing. So I think that there is a replacement, a changing in the energy mix. Slowly, because we are not a country, as I said before, but different countries. But there is a change. So I don't think that we can go back to the previous situation. But there is no problem for Russian gas because India and China and the Far East, for countries that don't have gas, is really, they express a big demand. And though I think that there is a shift that already started before 2014, also, and after the invasion of the Russian in Ukraine, the first phase. So I think that there is no problem for Russians to sell their gas, and they are selling also now. So
yeah, do you believe that those who sit in Brussels or those who sit in Washington who think that at some point Europe will stop purchasing Russian energy, do you think that's a dream?
No, I don't think it's a dream. I think that is a long process because, as before, when we talk about energy transition, we don't think about the past, infrastructures, and people and demand. Sanction is for today, but it's not. We cannot have a clean exit from the past. The past is there, very present, very strong, because it's been built in 2 centuries. So it's not something that we can avoid. Who is going to pay the cost is people. And people can't pay the cost for a while because they have wars. Then when they are not in a very good situation, they forget about war and they say, I want to be like before. And there is no politician that can, do that without paying consequences at the election.
Yeah. Walk me through what's happening in Italy today with regards to higher energy prices. Electricity bills are the highest in Europe. Is there a way to change that?
There is a way to change that. That is a big question also because we have to find a general consensus. As I said, we need more renewable, yes, but the efficiency of renewable are really marginal. 2,000 hours per year against 8,600 that we have available that we can reach with gas, for example, with a combined cycle or coal. I don't like, but it's there and it's still marginally there. To have a low price is not really. Nuclear is a possible solution, but in Italy, nuclear is very tough. And the composition of tariff in the gas tariff. So what we pay, 34 or 36% is due to the raw material. The rest are cost or the system for renewables, for example, because we put in the tariff, or taxes. So we have some flexibility, I think, in this area. If we reduce our incentives of, generally speaking, and we don't charge it on the tariff, we can reduce the price. That is a possibility. Taxes, I don't know, because we have a high debt, so we need that. We need this kind of charges on the tariff. The only way is really to change the energy mix, and the Italian energy mix is based on renewables and gas. Renewable, also if you have a huge amount of renewables, they cannot deliver in a continuous way, so they need the backup. And the gas is the backup, so represent the marginal costs. So at the end of the day, who is making the price is gas, not renewables. And that is the big issue. And so the problem is not easy, especially also if you We can identify the solution, for example, nuclear, before going through all the process to have a consensus, and then the industrial phase. It takes 10 years, 15 years. It's too much. So I think that gas is a solution, increase the quantity, and renewable is a solution. We have this kind of energy mix. And for nuclear, I think there is a strong sentiment to go back to nuclear because we have 2 referendums and the result was very clear, no nuclear in Italy. But I think that we have to increase renewable, yes. We have to increase wind power, and we have some problems, so offshore wind, onshore wind. But Italy is a wonderful country with a big history, tourism. We don't have a lot of space, a lot of mountains, so it's not easy also. There is no renewables, they need a lot of space. A lot of sun or wind we have in the south, but south we need the beauty of our lands and people with NIMBY, but a clear, understandable sentiment. They don't want this kind of infrastructure that are, they consume a lot of surface, and agriculture, tourism, landscape, wonderful landscape. So the situation is not easy. So at the end of the day, I think that gas is going to continue for sure, but we have to create a strong market because when the supply is high, the price is down. That is clearly, but now we are still in a scarcity of gas. And then from a political point of view, we have to, I think that this government is understanding the need to reduce the cost of energy. There is a lot of focus, but the constraints are very high for Italy and for Europe, because it's true that we pay more than the other country in Europe, but Europe on average pay 3 or 4 times the US price. And US, they found, because before it was higher in the US, they found tight gas, shale oil, shale gas, and they give their responsibility to the private sector to develop it without constraints, and they create an economic advantage for the US now.
Yeah. At what point do you see pragmatism being forced on Europe? Because this situation is destroying Europe's competitiveness, no?
Yeah, sure. You know, pragmatism is a cultural thing. And Europe is not really based on pragmatism. Maybe in North of Europe, I don't know. But all the Latin countries, they prefer to talk. They talk very well. They are really clever, smart, and wonderful talk. And they develop and they elaborate. And we are not like UK and the US, where pragmatism is there, fortunately for you, as a cultural factor. You cannot become what you are not, and you never been. And we are poets, we are writers. In terms of poets and writers, we are romantic. We love life. I'm joking now. I think that that is what is happening in Europe. Policy and target come before the industrial action. So before something is born, you try to define everything for this, the path, which kind of technology, which kind of investment, all the rules. And you write thousands of pages. If you look normal policy in Europe and you compare with UK and the US, few statements, few pages, understandable and readable.
So it's over-regulation, essentially.
Over-regulation, but it's cultural, I think. It's cultural. To make over-regulation is the point, but it's coming from a background. So I think that is a big point. In China, extreme pragmatism and top-down. The US bottom-up, but with a very simple policy. In any case, if there is a new startup, a new business, a new technology, you weigh that is growing and understand where the private sector can invest to grow it. In Europe it's different, unfortunately it's different, but I say it's cultural. So I don't think if at the end of the day we are going to have a to become like the US or UK pragmatism view and attitude. I hope so. Yeah, I hope so, but I'm not sure.
So what happens to Europe if pragmatism doesn't prevail?
I think that at the end of the day, we're going to change ourselves. If there is some existential problem, I hope that is not too late. But I think
change at the ballot box, or
I think that if we are not changed, people are going to change us.
People are going to push back.
I think so. I say that is clear that we are in a democracy. The sense of democracy is very strong in Europe. So if you are not able to do the right stuff for people, people are going to change us. Us in terms of institution, political system. That is what is going to happen because we are in a democratic system, fortunately.
Do you see that happening sooner or later?
It depends on what is happening outside. If the situation of globalization is still compromised, really compromised, it will remain without the necessary stuff for our people. The U.S. is not enough to supply everything, and we see also with Gaza is not enough allies. And there is the hope that Africa can work with us, or we work with Africa in a different way with respect to the past. That is a territory, is people that need a lot. We need what they have, but they need our stuff. In the past, we are not able to cooperate in the right, I think, agreement because we took without giving, or not giving in the right way without giving development. We gave other stuff that at the end of the day didn't solve the problem of Africa, and we see very well. So Africa is a possible solution. Democracy, for sure, is a solution. But sometimes, before people understanding what is happening, maybe it's too late. I don't know. I don't think there is never too late. But I think that there are possible solutions. Clearly, the strong alliance with the U.S. is essential. Essential. The Atlantic alliance is essential. Working with Africa is essential. And increase the understanding of what is happening from our leadership is another strong point. I think that very soon is going to happen because the situation is very critical, and what is happening outside is oblige us to be cautious and about the situation. So,
yeah, talk to me about carbon capture, because we've been speaking so often about the transition and what's going to happen by 2050. How do you see the dynamic there between traditional sources of energy, fossil fuels, and carbon capture by 2050? Because there are a lot of reports that say different things.
Yeah, carbon capture is not an energy vector. Is a tool. Is a pragmatic tool. It's not by chance that happening in the U.S. or UK first. Also in Italy now we have some breakthrough with small pilot project as any, because that is a is a way to be first of all to reduce emissions, keeping the installation, the infrastructure we are without new investment. So is a way to reduce emission without increasing the investment, and it's essential because you look at the demand. As I say, we have 3 points. We have to understand, give a priority to the best technology, considering the cost and considering the demand. CCS is considering cost, considering the demand, because we keep alive the existing infrastructure, and is applicable. There are different kind of CCS. In UK, we are using depleted reservoir that to reduce cost and be faster, so the time to market is essential. So CCS is really a transitional tool. It's not going to just be a panacea. No. It's not going to save the day. There is no panacea. There is no a single solution. So there is no a clean exit means there is no a single solution. There are different kind of solutions. This is to to reduce the cost for the society. We talk about cost for the society. This reduce the cost of society and reduce emission, give some life to chemicals that we need, for example, steel that we need, a lot of industry that are suffering a lot. And there is a carbon leakage, so these industries are moving, or, as I said, we increase our percentage in the tertiary and we buy product from outside. That doesn't mean that we reduce emission. Europe has been very good in reducing emission. If you look at what happened, if you look at from 2000 to 2023, and you look at the emission against GDP.
Yes.
Worldwide, we had a reduction of 20% of energy intensity and emissions intensity. It's good. But the emission increase of 50%, what happened? The GDP worldwide tripled because of demography, because of industry, because of growth of China and the US. In Europe, we had if you look at the GDP, so energy intensity, emission intensity against GDP, the reduction is more than double. So that means that we reduce emission. We reduce also energy intensity, but the GDP remained flat from 2008. For that reason, we have this strong. And that happened because the tertiary now, so what we buy outside, is reached more or less 70%. That means that we shift our emissions, our secondary industry outside. So that is not a way to reduce emission, because there is a strong connection in the atmosphere. So you buy, and we passed from in 2000 we spent, or 2008 we spent 700 billion euro to buy a product from outside. Now is 2.5 trillion. That means that it's been a different kind of mix. The secondary and the primary, so agriculture, has been reduced. We buy from outside because of globalization. But when globalization is segmented or reduced because of geopolitics, Europe is in a big problem. We don't have our secondary and industry. So our capability to refine also the products, that mean that we occupy the last segment of the cycle. And the segment, and you are very weak when the globalization is not there.
So that lack of perhaps pragmatism on the part of European officials when they sit down and look at this situation and say, we want to get to our climate change goals, we want to get to zero carbon emissions, how much is that going to hurt the process? Because it seems as if there are too many regulations, but not the right ones.
No, regulations are, I don't know if we can say there are too many, they are too complicated, and they are upfront. So they start before the game. And so at the end of the day, you have a single path. And for a private capital, you need different sensitivity to understand where you have to go in that direction, but with different kind of path. So I don't think that is the problem of regulation. Is a problem of view
or vision.
And vision is a problem of understand the long term. What happened in China? They work on a 30 years plan 30 years ago to understand about gas, oil, coal, critical minerals already 20 years ago. They don't have enough, so how they can provide the necessary tool and then create all the refinery system. The US the same. They had problem until 2007 for oil and gas, and all the private companies were outside to provide the right fuel to the US. Then when they discover now at home, the backyard, they come back. For sure, the US is less present from a geographies or geopolitical point of view because they need less than before. And we see the US company or the US in general, as you know, less present outside. So I think that energy is moving everything, but to move everything in a clever, smart way, you need to look 10, 20, 30 years in advance. That didn't happen. Europe, I'm European, so I can talk about ourselves, didn't have a energy security plan before, a strong one, built, and you have to, when you have a plan, you have to also to put in action this plan until the war, Russia invasion of Ukraine. They didn't have. And then they tried to recover. It's impossible to recover.
Playing catch up.
Because we have competition and other people already occupy the land that you need.
Quite literally. What's the
Yes.
solution?
The solution, I think that pragmatism is the solution. If we say we can go through the solution just with some words, I think pragmatism, leadership, ownership, love for people, and not for yourself. So we need really people that are ready to sacrifice themselves for the others. And that is part of leadership. Not just, as we say, give service, you have to give yourself if you want to recover. It's never too late if you have strong leaders, people that can fight not for themselves, for the others, and competencies. And if you don't have competence, try to recover the right competence, to get the right competence to achieve what you want with passion, with love, and trustability. We have to create a different relationship between institution, companies, and population that they don't
there's
trust.
No trust.
They don't trust us. They don't trust anybody because they don't get any clear view about what is going to happen. So I think that everything we can change everything, because it's true that the other are stronger at the moment, but you know we can be stronger. But if we go through this kind of stuff that are essential for a country, we are not a country, but we are a community. So the sense of community is essential.
So a transparency is absolutely key.
Interest for the other. When I talk about love, it looks strange, but the sense of a community is based on love. There is no differences. French, German, Italian, Spanish, there is no difference. There is a community, European community, that need to progress without dogmatism, without ideology, but a sense of community that we have to recover.
Claudio, it's wonderful to have you. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
London. Oh, London. It is known as the world's financial capital, along with New York, and is also Europe's cultural hub. More than 300 languages are spoken in London. The city houses many famous luxury hotels, but there are many cheaper accommodations too. You can try the hostels, a comfortable B&B, or even camping. London is home to the most amazing attractions in the world, and there are many ways to view it. See the city from above and get a panoramic view of the iconic skyline via the London Eye or view from the Shard. The Thames also makes for a stunning backdrop to the city's known attractions. You can take the river bus services or river tours to beat the traffic and see wonderful sights at the same time. Schedule trips to London's canals, including Regent's Canal and Little Venice. Have a look at the world's most precious treasures at the British Museum. Bump into a famous celebrity at Madame Tussauds, or meet the dinosaurs at the Natural History Museum. Many of London's best museums and galleries are actually free. You can spend time browsing through the British Museum, Natural History Museum, or the Science Museum at no cost. For clean and green spaces, London boasts of 8 royal parks, including Hyde Park and Richmond Park. London also houses one of the best theater scenes in the world. You can catch one of the long-running musicals, classic plays, or brand new works making their West End debuts. Expect to see famous faces on the London stage. Meanwhile, you can also take a culinary journey around the world with London's diverse restaurants. Choose from the Michelin-starred restaurants, the gastropubs, the traditional British restaurants, and places for afternoon tea. London is famous for its bar scene, with rooftop bars, riverside pubs, and champagne bars to offer. On a shopping spree, places to visit are the flagship stores on Oxford Street and the gifts and bric-a-brac at London's markets. The city also hosts the best sporting events in the world. Home to English football is the Wembley Stadium. See a match at Lord's Cricket Ground or Wimbledon Lawn Tennis Museum.
Me and him are like telepathic, you know what I mean? I know my brother better than anybody else. When both come together, you have greatness.
The announcement that the British rock band Oasis is reuniting for a new tour 15 years after brothers Liam and Noel Gallagher's acrimonious split has caused a sensation in the UK. It's been the most talked about story for a week, with more than 1 million people scrambling for tickets to next year's gigs. And tickets are changing hands for as much as £10,000, over $13,000 on the resale market. Well, hits such as Wonderwall, Champagne Supernova and Don't Look Back in Anger will be performed at the UK's biggest arenas, with the tour then expected to go global. The announcement also reignited memories of one of the most explosive musical feuds in the industry's history, when the so-called Battle of Britpop divided the country between fans of Oasis and Blur in a race for superiority in the music charts. In the 30 years since, there have been plenty of musical feuds and fallouts, such as the tensions between hip-hop giants Drake and Kendrick Lamar, or Kanye West and Taylor Swift. But at that time, Blur versus Oasis became the biggest rock rivalry since the Beatles versus the Rolling Stones. And it's never really disappeared. A new stage play about the feud called The Battle is heading to London's West End next year. So who won the battle of the Britpop bands? Let's revisit the debate with a pair of music experts to look back at the anger and abuse that divided the country by geography, class and culture. Well, I'm joined now by British broadcaster and music journalist Adrian Goldberg and John Robb, editor of the music publication Louder Than War, whose recent interview with Noel Gallagher gave fans new hope of a reunion between these strange brothers. So John, I'm going to start with you and just like to revisit that infamous feud between Oasis and Blur. But let's start with the news of Oasis, which has caused quite a sensation among music fans in the UK and around the world. Tell me how you got that exclusive interview with Noel.
Well, the interview I did with Noel was actually for the Definitely Maybe album. They were going to, well, it came out last week. It was a release of it. They had 2 attempts to record it initially, and the one you actually get to hear is the 3rd attempt to record it. So Noel remixed the first 2 attempts. And Noel is going to do 1 interview for the album. He asked me to do the interview. So it was filmed for them, you know, for Noel's people, Oasis people, wherever it was at the time. This is done months ago, so there's no sign on the band reforming. Now, when I think about it, I don't think they'd actually reformed at the point of time doing the interview. And what I was saying before the interview, you know, obviously they wanted me to talk about the album in the interview, but I didn't really want the Noel v. Liam thing, because kind of knowing them over the years, I know that there is an intense rivalry. They haven't spoken genuinely in 15 years. But I think if that's the only story that becomes out of the whole Oasis thing, you're kind of missing out on a lot of other stuff. And I said, wouldn't it be nice if you actually talked about the positive side of it? And he did. He was very nice about Liam. So when the interview got shown a week ago, which now seems like a year ago, people go, oh, God, this is a very different Noel. He's bigging up Liam. and he's bigging up the band. Is there something going on? And 48 hours later, something did go on.
So your chat may have had some sway in the whole thing.
Yeah, I like to think that. Yeah, it's me personally reformed the band. I mean, I think Noel's a very smart operator, so I think he would have known the right time to do this. You know, I think he picked exactly the right time to do this, didn't he? I mean, it's weird now we're in a position where the band actually seems bigger than they were in 1996. The amount of tickets they're selling for these live shows, or whatever cost they are for tickets, is higher than when they did the Nebworths 30 years ago, which seems crazy.
Well, let me bring in Adrian. And Adrian, why is this such a big deal for music fans in the UK and around the world?
I think you've got the phenomenon of nostalgia, people who remember Oasis from the first time round in the 90s. And of course, because the band split up, those people haven't had the opportunity to see the band for many, many years. But also, I think the band's musical influence has filtered down to their children. And I know that Oasis memes are massive on TikTok at the moment. Somebody getting a Liam Gallagher haircut on TikTok, a British model, has had 2.4 million views. On Instagram, searches for Oasis style. And this is even before the reunion were quite a thing. So I think you've got the combination of nostalgia from parents who want to relive their youth, but also their children who got into the music. You know, clearly there's an enduring quality about the music of Oasis that their kids have bought into, and a very particular British fashion style as well.
Well, Adrian, there's also the fact that the parents would know about the feud between two of the most successful British bands in the 90s. There was, of course, that rivalry between Oasis and Blur. So how does that kind of come into the mix, Adrian?
Truthfully, these days, that's really gone. I think it was very much of its moment in the mid-90s, very much beloved of the tabloids. You know, who doesn't love a band war? They were probably harking back to a time when John and I were scarcely born, to a Beatles versus Stones feud. So I think the people who ran the tabloids understood that there might be mileage. And clearly there was some degree of animosity between the bands. But ultimately now, I think all these years on, I think, truthfully, both bands stand in their own right. Both were significant bands of the 90s, and both still have a vital musical influence today. So I don't think, truthfully, that feud is selling tickets in 2024.
Well, I was going to ask John then, how, you know them, you've been close to these guys. How is the difference between the two bands, or how did that difference fuel the rivalry, and how did the fans embrace it at that time?
I think it's quite interesting because I think something outside the UK would be quite difficult to understand, but it's all about class, geographies, north, east, south, where class versus perceived middle class. Oasis kind of initially thought Blur were trying to jump on their bandwagon, and Blur probably thought Oasis trying to jump on their bandwagon. I mean, Noel Gallagher, when I interviewed about 20 years ago, he said that the music media and the music business had the stage set for Britpop, and Blur were going to be the main band in it. Then we turned up and they never forgave us. And I think even that part actually still gets played out to this day, because I think you see a lot of people in the UK music media not that comfortable with Oasis, even like 30 years later. But I think it was Blur's manager. He was a brilliant operator who actually worked in the same newspaper as me and Adrian did at the time, who actually sort of created the initial Blur v Oasis thing, but then he just ran away, because like Adrian was saying, it's a great story. Everyone likes a band rivalry, you know, Beatles, Stones, Clash, Pistols, you know, T-Rex, Bowie. Some are more serious than others, but it creates all sort of debates around it. You know, which side are you on? Are you? And it's all kind of showbiz in a way as well, and it's like a showbiz idea of the class system in the UK, and which still goes on, and I think all our culture is riven with those kind of visions and those kind of ideas.
But John, you know, knowing your friendship with the Gallaghers, is it fair to say that Blur were a little more magnanimous, while the Gallagher brothers were merciless in their put-downs that ranged from like hilarious, typically British one-liners to actually some quite shocking comments?
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff said wasn't that great, was it? But I think both sides. I don't think there was much evidence of anybody that magnanimous at the peak of it. I think they're both pressing each other's buttons. You know, I think obviously there was a fun side to it. It's great getting the tabloid headlines, but I think there's a serious side to it as well. But after a few years, it like Adrian was saying, it stopped. Noel's made records with Damon, and there's a mutual respect between most of them nowadays, isn't there?
And Adrian, John was saying about how everyone loves a bit of rivalry between various stars and bands and so on. How much do you believe the rivalry was genuine? How much was actually blown up to the benefit of both bands?
Well, I think at the time it was genuine. As you say, there were some quite bitter comments going to and fro. And as John suggests, it started off maybe as one of those little bits of hype that the music papers, of which John and I were part, were happy to seize on. But then it became a whole tabloid rivalry, and every comment was seized on, every comment was blown up. So I think there was a real thing behind it. But I really do think that was then and this is now. And I don't think it's particularly germane to the music buying public in 2024. And you also have to look, if you're thinking about Oasis, this is a band who went worldwide. They had 3 platinum selling albums in the United States. They had MTV Europe Awards. I think they won 4 MTV Europe Awards. So this was something that played out in the UK press, but I don't think Oasis would have had that global success. I think they would have had that in any event. I don't think they would have had it if they didn't have great songs that were able to endure. I just kind of think that moment's gone,
All right. Well, I was going to say, though, just for those who weren't born at that time, John, perhaps things came to a head during the race for number 1 in 1995 to get that top single. Tell me about that and the effect it had on the country at the time.
Well, I think that was the peak of it, really, one of the great Britpop wars. I think it was Alan McGee that said that when we lost the battle, but we actually won the war, because the Oasis album came out. They didn't get the number 1 single, but their album comes out and it's one of the best-selling albums ever in the UK. I think it's in the end, if you look at the Beatles Stones thing, I always think this about that. The Stones were the biggest band in the 60s, but the Beatles the biggest phenomenon in the 60s. You can only get to a certain level as a band. You're not going to get any bigger. But some bands go beyond that into the stratosphere, and I think in the UK especially that's what Oasis did. They became a band that everybody had an opinion on, and Blur were just a really big band, and that was kind of the result of what came out of the Britpop wars.
Yeah, you described what happened there, but let me ask you, John, starting with you and maybe get Adrian's perspective afterwards. Numbers apart, I mean, maybe an unfair question, but who do you think made the better music and which has stood the test of time?
I think they're both really good. I think they both do really different functions. I mean, Blur fantastically inventive, but then of course Damon Albarn is a brilliant magpie as well. I don't think anybody's, people always have this idea that Oasis, everything they stole was off the Beatles, but knowing Noel Gallagher, well, I know he likes a lot of music way beyond the Beatles. He doesn't just have the Beatles red and blue records, he's really into post-punk, he's really into obscure underground bands, there's a lot of stuff in that melting pot. There's a few nicks in there, but every band nicks spits the stuff off other people anyway, and so I think there was with Blur, there was a kind of an artful inventiveness to their music, but it takes an equal amount of skill to write a song that 80,000 people in the field can completely connect with. And it's those kind of everyman songs are difficult to write. Otherwise, there'd be hundreds and hundreds of bands doing them. I think there's equal but very different talents at play here.
Well, Adrian, what's your take on that, and which has stood the
Well, no, listen, I'm sad to agree with John, really. I think if you, from a kind of the traditional music critic's point of view, I think Blur are probably seen as the more artistic band, seen as the more creative. I think Damon Albarn is the individual of all of the people involved in this particular discussion who has kind of continued to push at boundaries musically. But if I go for an evening out in the pubs and clubs of the West Midlands, which is home to neither Oasis or Blur, and they might have a guitarist there, a singer-songwriter just entertaining people in the pub, what will we hear? We won't hear a Blur song. We will hear, in all probability, Wonderwall or another song by Oasis. And they have got the brilliant ability to write songs that connect with people and connect with people over the decades. And that is not something to be in any way sneered at or dismissed. That's a great talent.
Well, John, you'd indicated that Noel and Blur's Damon Albarn have long since buried the hatchet, and they've even collaborated musically. Now, is it possibly the bigger feud was between the Gallagher brothers in Oasis, Liam and Noel, or do you think that their relationship has been truly repaired? Or perhaps the prospect of a multi-million-dollar payday simply papered over the cracks? What do you think, John?
Well, I think there's probably both factors at play, but I think the thing is, if it's your brother and you fall out, then you're still joined together somehow, aren't you? So at some point you're going to have to like sort this situation out. I think, there's a genuine emotional thing there. You want to sort it out, don't you? So maybe that's what happened. Maybe they haven't. Maybe, there's always this mistake that bands make, especially younger bands. It's your gang against the world. But when you're an older band, maybe you don't get on. But when you're on stage, it's so magical. It sounds so brilliant. There's a certain chemistry that you could put, not getting on those people. I mean, the Rolling Stones worked out a way of operating despite 10 years and not that Jagger and Rich not getting on. And then they have got on, haven't they? They've actually worked, it's got to the other side of that situation. So all that's in there. I think, of course, the money is a prime factor or a big factor in reforming, but there's still a thing that when you're on stage or in a rehearsal room and you're both there together, there's something truly magical happens. That chemistry that people talk about. I think it's worth putting up with all the other stuff to get to that situation.
Well, with the world we live in today, streaming has created a totally different environment for bands. And here's one for both of you, maybe starting with you, Adrian. Today on Spotify, Blur has 11 million monthly listeners, and their most popular song, Song 2, is closing in on 1 billion streams, while Oasis has more than 28 million monthly listeners, and their song Wonderwall has racked up an incredible 2 billion streams. So with both bands back on stage performing again, do you expect that new generation will discover them and they'll continue performing, even though it was the parents' music for these youngsters and they know nothing about the past feuds, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the great things about streaming services and video services like YouTube is that although sadly artists perhaps don't get their fair reward from them, the upside is that young people can access music from previous generations in a way that John and I would have found really difficult when we were young music critics starting out. So my kids can, at the push of a button, listen to Oasis and listen to Blur and listen to a whole range of other bands. I was at a concert last night watching a fantastic Scottish band called Bell and Sebastian, who've been knocking around for 27 years. But my kids, who are considerably younger than me, of course, were into them. And I think this kind of division and this tribalism around music, I wouldn't say it's disappeared altogether, but I think it is a very different music culture now, where you can just say to somebody, have a listen to that. And whether it was recorded in 1960, 70, 80, 90, or last week, it's just there at the push of a button. So I think young people will continue to discover Blur. They'll continue to discover Oasis. That's brilliant.
John, Rob, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's true. I think all music is now contemporary. There's no sense of it being from what, like, I remember like the Beatles when I was growing up. The Beatles seemed like they're from the Victorian times, whereas now it's all level playing field. It's all there at once. I think Oasis have resonated through the generations. I mean, even when they do the solo gigs, if you go to Liam Gallagher solo gig, most of the crowd are about 16 years old. And I think also that's partially to do with his Twitter presence, because I think in a way he's like Britain's oldest teenager. He talks like a teenager, which actually is not a critique really. It's quite a cool thing to do, isn't it? He's funny and he has no filter. And then 16, 17-year-olds complete, like he's sat there and people put something up, he puts a funny comment underneath, So I think people like that as well, they fit into the modern age. Yes, on certain levels there is a retrospective thing about them, but on another weird level, they feel very contemporary as well.
I can tell you one of the great satisfactions I have with my 18-year-old daughter is that if a song comes up on the radio and it's a remake, I can turn around and say, I heard the original when it first came out. John Robb, Adrian Goldberg, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Cheers.
All the best.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, coming up in today's programme. An Israeli airstrike kills 5 paramedics after striking a civil defense emergency center in southern Lebanon. Also in southern Lebanon, Israel says it has killed 2 Hezbollah commanders, Ahmed Mustafa al-Haj Ali and Mohammed Ali Hamdan. An Israeli airstrike kills at least 28 people and wounds dozens of others who were sheltering at a school in Deir al-Balah, which is in central Gaza. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu considers retaliation following on from last week's attack by Iran. In just a moment, I'll be speaking to the retired Israeli Major General and former National Security Advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu, Yaakov Amidror. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. We begin in Lebanon, where Israel's Air Force killed 5 paramedics after striking a civil defense emergency center in the southern village of Dergaya. Well, overnight, airstrikes also hit Wardaniya, which is a town in central Lebanon's Mount Lebanon Governorate, killing at least 5 people there. Well, 2 significant strikes were also reported in Beirut's southern suburbs. Well, the Israeli military says it has killed 2 Hezbollah commanders in southern Lebanon. One was Ahmed Mustafa al-Haj Ali, allegedly responsible for firing hundreds of rockets and anti-tank missiles at Kiryat Shimona. Well, Israel also says it has killed Mohammed Ali Hamdan, who's accused of launching missile attacks on northern Israel. Additionally, Israel claims to have bombed weapons warehouses in Beirut and military infrastructure in southern Lebanon, though Hezbollah has yet to respond. Well, this comes as the Israeli military says approximately 40 rockets were fired from Lebanon towards upper Israel's Upper Galilee. Well, Israeli media reports say that some of the rockets were intercepted, but others hit a building in Margaliot. Well, explosions were also hit in Kiryat Shimona, where Hezbollah rockets also killed 2 Israelis on Wednesday. Welcome. We begin in Lebanon, where Israel's Air Force killed 5 paramedics after striking a civil defense emergency center in the southern village of Dergaya. Well, overnight airstrikes also hit Wardaniya, which is a town in Lebanon's central mountain district, killing at least 5 people there. Well, 2 significant strikes were also reported in Beirut's southern suburbs. Well, the Israeli military says it has killed 2 Hezbollah commanders in southern Lebanon. One of them, Ahmed Mustafa al-Haj Ali, is allegedly responsible for firing hundreds of rockets and anti-tank missiles at Kiryat Shimona. They also report having killed Mohammed Ali Hamdan, who's accused of launching missile attacks on northern Israel. Additionally, Israel claims to have bombed weapons warehouses in Beirut and military infrastructure in southern Lebanon, though Hezbollah has yet to respond to this. Well, this all comes as the Israeli military says approximately 40 rockets were fired from Lebanon towards northern Israel's Upper Galilee. Well, Israeli media reports say that some of the rockets were intercepted, but others hit a building in Margaliot. Well, explosions were also heard in Kiryat Shimona, where Hezbollah rockets killed 2 Israelis on Wednesday. Well, I'm joined now by the managing director of the Lebanese advocacy group Kullu Irada and a former senior economic advisor to the United Nations, Diana Menhem. Thank you very much indeed for joining us now from Beirut. Just looking broadly at the situation, the situation on the ground in Lebanon at the moment. We're in a situation where more than 2,000 people have been killed. 1.2 million people have been forced to flee their homes. Just bring us up to speed on what's been happening during the last 24 hours on the ground.
I mean, what has happened in the past 24 hours is the same as what has been happening for the past few days. All eyes now are on South Lebanon. There's a huge fear among the Lebanese that what Israel had claimed to be a very limited ground operation in south of Lebanon is slowly turning into an invasion, into a huge ground operation. There is a real fear that this will continue for a very long time, unlike what was previously stated. And as these ground incursions continue, I mean, the Lebanese are living in total dystopia. I mean, it's a very dark reality of sleeping to the sound of bombs, hoping nothing will happen to the people you know and love, waiting for the daily death toll and wishing that it is low, and waiting desperately for the hostilities to end, which unfortunately, until the moment, the opposite seems to be true. The war is expanding, the death toll is increasing, and Lebanon, especially the towns in the south and in Dahye, are slowly being reduced to rubble. Today, nearly 1 out of 5 Lebanese are internally displaced, many of them coming from areas that have been completely destroyed. The Lebanese are living in awful conditions. The displaced are living in horrible conditions. Some of them are sleeping on the streets, others at the beach. Those lucky enough to be staying in an apartment are sharing it sometimes with 20 to 25 family members. Some are even taking turns to sleep. I mean, this is deplorable and unsustainable.
And in terms of the overall humanitarian situation across the country, I mean, even before this latest disaster in Lebanon, the government was under enormous pressure, households were under enormous pressure, the middle class has been plunged in many cases into poverty. Are people managing to make ends meet? I mean, presumably if people were living paycheck to paycheck and now there aren't any paychecks, I mean, are people going to be able to afford to feed themselves and feed their families?
I mean, what you're referring to is absolutely true. In fact, Lebanon has been dependent for the past 5 years on aid and on remittances that come from the Lebanese diaspora that send money to their families. And this norm is continuing today. And what is absolutely correct is that Lebanon has been struggling with an economic crisis, with one of the worst economic crises of the past 150 years, actually, for the past 5 years now. And that the state, even before the war, was unable to provide basic services to its citizens. So the country has been suffering for quite a while now, and now this war has compounded all of the miseries of the Lebanese. The state is extremely fragile. Its response is far from being sufficient compared to the needs on the ground, and many of the Lebanese are relying on personal initiatives and on non-governmental organizations in order for them to meet their needs.
And I'm just wondering, in terms of morale and listening to the situation you've described for us there, I mean, do the Lebanese people feel like the world and their allies have turned their back on them? And do people feel abandoned by the international community there?
The Lebanese are absolutely left on their own. It's not only the international community that has left them, it's also their own state that has left them. I mean, for the past 5 years, and of course now more than ever, the Lebanese have really forgotten what it means to live normal lives, to have careers, to think about starting a business in the country. They have definitely, unfortunately, given up on the option of making a future for themselves and for their children here. They are left totally on their own to their fate. The Lebanese state is incapable of defending their national interests. The international community has, for the past year, made promises that it has been unable to hold with regards to actually stopping Israeli aggression, be it in Gaza or in Lebanon. And we found ourselves today in a situation where we're actually stuck between a never-ending cycle of Israeli aggression and, of course, Iran's regional interest, and Iran trying to push its regional interest at the expense of the Lebanese.
Indeed. And do you think, just referring to some of the points you've made there, that if Lebanon had a proper functioning government, that none of this would have happened, that things would have taken a very different turn?
I'll take the year 2006 as an example. I don't think that none of this would have happened, but I definitely think that had Lebanon had a capable government today that is able to draw a clear line between Hezbollah's calculations and between the national interest of Lebanon and of the Lebanese, then yes, the situation would have probably been different. We have lived this in 2006, where a government was able very clearly to push for Lebanon's interest, to get Hezbollah on the table and to get Hezbollah and the Israelis to agree to an agreement that actually upheld Lebanon's national interest. This is very far from today's reality. I mean, and you can see very clearly that the government is helpless. We can see an outrageous statement, I mean, that completely undermined Lebanese sovereignty. The Iranian prime minister has indicated very clearly a few days ago that it was Lebanon's duty to defend Gaza, signaling his clear refusal to de-link both fronts and implying that the war in Lebanon had to go on. We can also see that the Israeli prime minister ominously informed the Lebanese in a statement that more destruction and death are coming to Lebanon. And in the midst of it all, the Lebanese state is absent, is extremely absent. There was a very shy attempt a few days before the visit of the Iranian foreign minister, to push for, to call for a ceasefire, to push for the implementation of 1701, but this was clearly deflected after the visit of the Iranian foreign minister.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to ask you about the message that was put out, I think, on Tuesday by Prime Minister Netanyahu to the Lebanese people. How did that go down?
Listen, regardless of what the Lebanese feel towards Hezbollah today, make no mistake, all the Lebanese realize that Israel is an enemy. And what we watched on the screen with Netanyahu's statement is actually Israel sowing more hatred and more extremism, the very same extremism that it claims to want to eradicate. These statements have really awakened deep fears among the Lebanese of further Israeli aggression, of a full Israeli invasion. The Lebanese have not forgotten what happened in 2006 and what happened before the year 2000. So no, the statement was outrageous, we believe. I don't really understand what was the purpose behind Prime Minister Netanyahu's statement. That was definitely outrageous, and the Lebanese felt outraged by it.
Has public opinion and public sentiment towards Hezbollah changed at all, would you say, in the last couple of weeks? And I'm just wondering, whether there are pockets of Lebanese society where people are secretly pleased that Hassan Nasrallah is no longer alive, and they want to see Hezbollah further degraded and weakened. I mean, are you hearing or seeing any evidence to suggest that public opinion is shifting?
I mean, public opinion is obviously shifting. The Lebanese, those of them who had not realized it before, many of the Lebanese today realize that Hezbollah has actually been dragging us towards mass suicide. This is a war that Hezbollah dragged the Lebanese into without their will. And at the same time, this is a war that Hezbollah has given to the Israelis. It's a war that the Israelis have wanted for a long while. So Hezbollah has given the Israelis the pretext for this war. And the Lebanese realize this very well. The Lebanese today are, if I want to sum it up in one word, tired. They are tired of ideological projects. They are tired of regional agendas. They are tired of being sold empty victories, victories that are not reflected anywhere in their daily lives. Today, what the Lebanese want is to restore their sense of normal life. They want to restore their livelihoods. They want to be able to live in a normal country again. They are tired of these empty victories. The only victory for the Lebanese today is to find shelter and to restore their lives. And they realize that this is their priority today.
You've been talking about some events in the past, going back to 2006. I just wonder whether, just looking back, you can identify some key mistakes that were made in the past by people in government in Lebanon who managed somehow or other to allow Hezbollah to hold the entire country to ransom. What would you say the moments were when things could have been done differently and Lebanon wouldn't be in the situation it's in today, which is shackled by Hezbollah?
I believe that, first of all, if you want to talk about the past year, I believe that for a big part of the past year, Lebanon had the opportunity of a diplomatic settlement. It was very clear, the international community had repeated it so many times, even the Israelis had mentioned it so many times, that we had the opportunity for the diplomatic settlement. The problem is that the Lebanese government never had the courage to take this stand. It was rather repeating Hezbollah statements. It was rather echoing Hezbollah's interests rather than taking a firm stand and standing for the interests of the Lebanese. This is one. Now, of course, if you want to go back to before this year, I believe that all of the political actors in this country have failed to build a state that can defend the Lebanese, and a state that can actually treat all Lebanese as an equal footing. And this is not only Hezbollah's mistake, it's actually a crime that was committed by the entire Lebanese political class that has preferred to preserve its own narrow interest at the expense of actually building a state.
And for people watching who are wondering, Hassan Nasrallah is dead. His successor, we think, is probably dead as well. A large number of operatives and senior ranking officials within that group are dead or severely injured from the pager attacks of 3 weeks ago. How is Hezbollah still functioning? What do people say about that there in Lebanon?
I mean, it's very clear that, first of all, there's some sort of collegial decision-making that is at the level of whatever remains of the leadership, or the tier 2 or tier 3 of the leadership. But more importantly, on the ground, it's very clear that Hezbollah has moved to what it does best, which is sort of a decentralized structure with guerrilla-like warfare, and it's very clear that this has been effective, actually. I mean, to some extent, in south of Lebanon. Hezbollah continues to operate in south of Lebanon and to stand against Israeli aggression. So what we're talking about is more collegial decision-making at the level of leadership, and the more decentralized structure, particularly with regards to guerrilla warfare in south of Lebanon.
Just looking forwards, Diana, to the future, we heard that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden had a conversation on the telephone last night. They don't seem to have been speaking very much the last few weeks, which is surprising, given that they are staunch allies. Do you think the Lebanese people still regard the United States as being an ally of Lebanon?
I believe that the international community in general, and including the United States, has, as I mentioned earlier, not stood up to its talk with regards to actually upholding international human rights and with regards to stopping Israeli aggression. And I believe that this level of impunity that Israel has reached today is allowing it to commit more and more atrocities that will only backfire in the region. That being said, what I would like to focus on more is what the Lebanese and what the Lebanese political class will do vis-a-vis this war that is unfolding. It's up to us as Lebanese to stand up to our interests, to pronounce what we want, to work today on electing a president of the Republic, because Lebanon has been suffering from a presidential vacuum for the past 2 years now, to actually elect a capable government, because Lebanon's government today is in a caretaker mode, to actually deploy the Lebanese armed forces across all Lebanese territory, and to engage in a real process of political reform and of reconciliation among the Lebanese. There is a lot of work that the Lebanese political class has to do itself. And of course, the international community also has a moral and a political responsibility towards the Lebanese and towards the people of this region to stop this Israeli aggression, or to pressure the Israelis even more for them to stop their aggression.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Diana Menhem, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, for more, I'm joined now by the former US ambassador to Lebanon and former US Special Envoy for Peace in the Middle East under President Barack Obama, David Hale. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Joe Biden held their first telephone conversation in more than a month yesterday. Don't you find it slightly extraordinary that they're not speaking more often under the current circumstances?
Yes, and I'm glad that they have put whatever personal differences they've been having aside long enough to have a conversation between these two world leaders at a moment where so much is at stake. I think that is very important. I will say, I mean, I've been around Washington a long time, and I know that Prime Minister Netanyahu has rarely been an American president's favorite counterpart. But the important thing is they're talking again.
They are, but it does seem that President Biden has pretty limited influence or limited ability to influence Netanyahu. I mean, why do you think this is the case?
You know, it's very strange because it's almost a schizophrenia. Because at the military-to-military level, the United States' support for Israel is unshakable and has been instrumental, frankly, in allowing Israel to defend itself so effectively. And yet at the political diplomatic level, the administration has had a very difficult time asserting its own relevance and having the various parties on both sides, Israel and the pro-Iranians, to take our will seriously. And now we're facing the period of the twilight, weeks and months of this administration. So their influence is evaporating rapidly.
And you sort of alluded earlier to some differences, shall we say, between the two men. And there's this new book out by the journalist Bob Woodward entitled War that everyone seems to be talking about. I haven't read it. I don't know if you have. But how likely do you think it is that President Biden used the kind of language he's reported to have used to describe the Israeli Prime Minister?
I haven't read the book either. I've seen excerpts. I obviously am not an insider. I'm retired, but none of that surprises me. I've heard other presidents use even worse language about him. So, there's high stakes. There's a lot of emotion. These are powerful men with big egos. The important thing is that they bring all that under control and act on the interests of our two states, which have an incredibly meaningful alliance.
Yeah, and as you say, the final months of the Biden administration, and, to the outside world, it does look a little bit like he's sort of given up on this particular issue. We're 26 days away, aren't we, from the US presidential election? And I'm just wondering what consequences you see the perceived inaction by the Biden administration as having for Vice President Kamala Harris, who is trying to carry the banner for her party into this election.
Well, one of the reasons I think this administration has had difficulty influencing the situation in the Middle East is that it is conflicted itself on what goals it has because of the election and because of the spectrum of opinion within the Democratic Party base, which goes all the way from the traditional pro-Israeli stance of so many Democrats to all the way to an increasingly vocal, if I can use the word, more progressive outlook, which is more willing to challenge Israel, even to the extent of, frankly, veering into anti-Semitism. And I think the administration has been reluctant to take a strong stand because it doesn't want to alienate any of those groups. And yet, at a moment like this, where it's really a moment of truth in the Middle East, it's very hard not to take a stand. And so what they've been offering, with that political backdrop, what they've been offering is just not relevant to the moment when, no one in the region wants a ceasefire, only the outsiders, the Americans, the Europeans, the Arabs. We've not really offered a credible alternative to reestablish security and stability in the Middle East through diplomacy. So the Israelis take matters into their own hands. And this is what we're seeing.
And if we're talking about Kamala Harris, let's mention her opponent in this race, Donald Trump. I mean, do you think he's going to be able to bring something to the table in terms of engaging with Prime Minister Netanyahu? How do you see the state of relations between those two men?
Well, they accomplished things together that were unprecedented in terms of the relocation of our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in recognition of reality, and the Abraham Accords. So I think there's a track record there that shows we can get results together. I honestly believe, I was in the administration. I was the number 3 individual at the State Department for most of the Trump years. And I suspect that they'll return, if they're elected, to a maximum pressure strategy on Iran. Unlike the current administration, which is reluctant to acknowledge Iran's central role as the source of violence and chaos in the Middle East, the Trump people have no hesitation to do so. So I think you'll see piling on sanctions, weapons interdiction, diplomatic strategies to isolate Iran, and military pressure as well. And I think that, frankly, may be what's required if they're persistent in applying that pressure.
And just with regards to Iran, we anticipate that Israel will be striking Iran in retaliation for that barrage of missiles fired at Israel 9 days ago. Just wondering what your thoughts are as to what might happen and what Washington's red lines are at this stage.
Well, I think that the Israelis have been wise not to sort of rush into a tit-for-tat exchange directly with Iran. To be honest, I think I'm a hardliner on Iran, but I'm not sure it's even necessary. I think the Israelis have accomplished a demonstration that they control the escalatory ladder and that they're regaining some degree of domination over the Iranian proxies, which is the first order of business and not completed. So I think, if they find a military target and they can take a clean shot, I don't know who would really argue against that other than the Iranians themselves. But I'm not sure it really changes the equation right now. I think they just need to keep the pressure on the proxies, and that will over time change Iranian behavior because they are growing weaker and weaker. And as we tighten the noose together.
Okay, let's talk a bit about Lebanon. After all, you were ambassador there during the years 2013 to 2015. Do you feel that there's there was a sense of inevitability about where we are now? From what you saw there, did you see the country, descending into the level of chaos that it's currently in?
I am often a pessimist. I never imagined when I left in 2015 that things could get so much worse as they have. And just when you think it can't get worse, it does get worse. They've been enduring a political paralysis, domination by Hezbollah, who has arms that no one else in the country has. They have been enduring an economic and financial meltdown that was triggered largely by the corruption and mismanagement of key individuals in Lebanon. The quality of life for the middle class, which was robust in Lebanon, has been decimated. And the government is incapable of finding a path out of this. They are unable to elect a president, and therefore they don't have a prime minister who's fully confirmed or a cabinet. It just gets worse and worse. And now we have, yet again, the movie that we've all seen before of what's happening in the South. So it is time for the United States and others to think about how, once Israel has reestablished and achieved its goals on its northern border, what are we going to do about Lebanon? And one of the historical patterns that unfortunately has not served U.S. interests is that we often just walk away once the immediate problem of the ceasefire has been achieved. And we don't really invest in the longer-term solutions that are needed to prevent these things from happening in the future.
And I'm just wondering whether you, as ambassador to Lebanon, had any encounters or any dealings with Hezbollah, or what was the policy at the time? Was it to sort of totally ignore them and not to try to engage, or were there ever any attempts to try to engage with them and maybe somehow improve the situation even back then?
No, the United States has had a very strict policy right from the start when Hezbollah was formed and blew up 2 of our embassies and Marine barracks and took a number of Americans hostage, including U.S. officials, and killed them, that we don't deal with this kind of party and terrorist organization, and I hope we never will. We wouldn't be able to influence them by having a tea party with them. The only influence comes about through pressure and building alliances from those also who feel threatened. And Hezbollah, by the way, has eliminated so much of the opposition that would normally be emerging now in this vacuum through assassination.
Yeah, I mean, Hezbollah has been dealt blow after blow in the last couple of weeks. And it does seem that Israel is managing to severely degrade them. I'd just like to ask your reaction to what's happened the last couple of weeks. I mean, I think everyone was taken by surprise, and I'm just wondering how much further you think Israel wants to go in terms of their will to degrade Hezbollah, or have they gone far enough?
Well, it's astounding what they've accomplished. I never imagined they had this capability. And Hezbollah obviously is never going to be quite the same. But while Nasrallah is dead, Hezbollah is not. They do have, ranks and ranks of fighters. They still have an enormous amount of very high-tech and medium and low-tech, by the way, technology and weapons to deploy, as we've seen. And I think that if the Israeli objective is as they state, which is a relatively finite objective compared to Gaza and Hamas, they will be focused on their southern border. There are indications, though, of mission creep. The evacuation zone has kept growing from about 15% of Lebanon to now 25% of Lebanon. There's a maritime operation underway. So I hope that their successes are not leading to overreach and hubris. But they definitely want to degrade Hezbollah significantly in the short run. And then together, we all have a longer-term objective, which is how do we make sure that Iran never again can dominate and control the situation throughout the Middle East through these proxies, not just Hezbollah, but the others that we have seen.
We've heard the Israeli Prime Minister giving these addresses to the people of Iran, and this week the people of Lebanon. He said in a video message, it's time that you took back your country from Hezbollah. I mean, what do you think he's trying to achieve here? Because, I mean, it's very difficult to imagine how the Lebanese people are supposed to do what he's asking them to do.
Right. I mean, the Lebanese are deeply divided in many ways, including a fault line between pro-Iranian and Western-oriented elements. But the Western-oriented elements have been largely intimidated, if not killed, by Hezbollah. So expecting them to come out suddenly and rise up in opposition is to expect suicide. So I don't think that itself is going to happen. I can understand the Israeli leaders trying to demonstrate that their ultimate goals are to reestablish stability that will be beneficial to Lebanese and Israeli innocent victims alike. But I think these kinds of messages are unlikely to really be effective. I think it has to be coming from authentic voices in these societies that are asking for this, and it's going to take time, and timing is crucial in diplomacy and statecraft.
Do you see Lebanon heading in the same direction as Gaza?
No, I don't. I hope not. We've certainly seen in the past that, unlike in Gaza so far anyway, if there is Israeli overreach in Lebanon, there will be a counter-reaction. And it's not gone well in the past for Israel. So again, I hope they've learned the lessons. There's no reason that they have not. When they talk about limited in duration and physical and geographical extent, that really is true, and that they plan to go in and out to use this incredibly effective new strategies that they've developed, that they use them well to reestablish security as every state's entitled to, but not to try to dominate Lebanon in turn.
I just want to ask you what the chances are, in your opinion, of a broader war in the Middle East, and one into which the United States is drawn in.
You know, I get the question a lot, and I'm always a little bit, with all due respect, a little bit puzzled by it, because, of course, we have a very broad war that's gone on for a year, which is longer than we've seen since the 80s in the region. And, yeah, it could get worse. I mean, you could certainly see a scenario where there's a war in the Persian Arabian Gulf and threatens oil facilities on both sides. You could see, you know, there's a question mark over Syria and the Russians are there. But I frankly, I don't believe that there's any real interest in going down those roads. I think that we and our Israeli friends and others who feel threatened by Iran need to focus on the very specific steps that can continue to weaken them. And the weaker they are, the less likely they are to do things that, frankly, are not very effective, such as we've seen with these two, April and now, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, the barrages against Israel just aren't effective. And so I also think we should not scare ourselves into thinking that that Iran is almighty. They have been able to dominate the scene for a long time because no one was countering them. And now that it's happening, we see that actually they're on the defensive.
Yeah, they've been infiltrated, haven't they, in a way that perhaps no one had imagined. There are all sorts of reports about the level of infiltration, and I'm assuming, and you know, I get the impression from talking to analysts about Iran that people there are extremely paranoid in the corridors of power. Is that something you're hearing as well?
Sure. I mean, I don't hear a lot from Iran myself, but I can only imagine that would be the case. And that is what's frankly needed to make them change their motivation. Look, they'd be happy to fight Israel to every last Arab, every last Lebanese, every last Palestinian. And that equation has to change. They have to feel that there's a price that they're going to pay for this continued behavior. And once they feel that that cost is real and meaningful, then they might start to change their behavior. And that's when we can throttle back the power equation and begin to offer ideas on how to bring about a more stable, durable Middle East peace.
Okay, well, we're out of time. I really want to say a big thank you to you for taking the time to speak to us. David Hale, former US ambassador to Lebanon, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
My next guest served as the National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during the years 2011 to 2013. He's also a researcher at JINSA, which is the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. He is retired Israeli Major General Yaakov Admiral. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Al Arabiya News. General Admiral, 2 weeks ago you told the Israeli television channel 14 that Israel is, quote, very far from defeating or stripping Hezbollah of its capabilities. 16 days since you made those comments. I'd just like to ask you how you see things have evolved.
We still have a very long way to go. In Israel, it was kind of euphoria, you know, after the success of the Beeper surprise, as the Arab called this, Eid al-Beeper. The success to eliminate the leadership of Hezbollah, and so on and so forth. So in Israel, it was kind of euphoria, and for me, it was very important to emphasize, knowing Hezbollah for the last 40 years, that it is not the end. It is a strong organization which will find the way how to continue the war, which was initiated by this organization in the 8th of October last year, to continue the war in spite the fact that they got a huge blow. I mean, we killed the whole leadership of the organization. We succeeded to destroy many of its long and medium range missiles, and to kill many of the commanders on the ground, and more so in the last weekend, in a very successful operation in which we destroy all the command points of the Hezbollah in the south. So no question that we have huge success in the first 4 weeks of the war against Hezbollah. But still, it's very important to remember, Hezbollah is a strong organization, and they are continuing to fight. They will continue to launch rockets and missiles and into Israel, not just in the north, but also to the center of Israel. That was very important for me 16 days ago, to put the balance in another place, to show the people, the Israeli people, that were very happy with the situation in Lebanon. Guys, we have a long way to go.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as you say, Hezbollah is still managing to function in the absence of its leader's replacement. That organization continues to fire rockets at your country. I'm just wondering, you know, where you see things heading to from here, and what the options are, you know, for Israel. Do you walk away, having seriously degraded Hezbollah, you know, perhaps as was done in 2006, or do you carry on despite the fact that serious damage is being inflicted on innocent Lebanese civilians?
Look, I think that the degradation of Hezbollah this time is much, much bigger than it was in 2006. But the lesson that we have from 2006, that if we allow Hezbollah to stay in South Lebanon and to continue to be connected to Syria and Iran, we will find stronger Hezbollah a few years from now. So the biggest mistake of 2006 should not be done again by Israel, meaning to stop too early and to let, after the war, Hezbollah to strengthen and to build capabilities and to be strong in the south in a way that it is endangering our population in North Israel. We have to build another situation. In a way, what we need is to implement 1701, the decision of the United Nations after the operation of 2006, which never had been implemented. But this time, we will enforce it. The IDF will enforce it, not UNIFIL, because UNIFIL is a bad joke. They didn't succeed even to write one report about the Hezbollah, not mentioning the fact that they had the task, supposedly, to prevent Hezbollah from building itself in the south. Even not one report was published by UNIFIL. So if you want to understand what Israel wants to achieve, go to the decision of the United Nations. If you want to understand what Israel is doing, we are degrading Hezbollah, and we will continue to do it for a long time, to the level in which Israel will not be deterred anymore by Hezbollah, and Israel will have the ability in the future to stop any attempt by Hezbollah, the Iranians and the Syrians, to rebuild Hezbollah in Lebanon. And in the south part of Lebanon, our interest is different. What we want is a buffer zone in which there is no Hezbollah at all, not facilities, not infrastructure, not terrorists, not units of Hezbollah, nothing. Hezbollah will not live anymore, will not be there, will not be allocated. No Hezbollah in South Lebanon. From the Litani south, it will be a buffer zone in which Hezbollah does not exist. Only then our citizens will be ready to go back to their homes, because they understand that if that is not the situation on the ground, they might find the threat coming again, not next year, 2 years from now. That is something that we will not allow to happen.
With regards to Iran, I think I'm correct in saying that you advocate a stronger response from Israel to that Iranian barrage of missiles fired at your country 9 days ago than what we saw 6 months ago when there was a similar situation. What would you advise by way of a response on the part of your government?
I don't think that I have enough information to say what sector should we attack. Will it be the oil industry, the nuclear facilities, the industry of the military industry of Iran, or regime symbols, or whatever? I don't feel that I have enough information to say which sector should be attacked. What I think is very important to take into account in the decision, that one, some of the targets should be very close to Tehran, that it will be seen from Tehran. And second, that it doesn't matter which sector, it doesn't matter what is the target should be totally destroyed. It is the first time that Israel is hitting kinetically Iran. And in this situation, it should be very clear to the Iranians that if we reach a place and we attack it, the strike will be accurate and devastating. Meaning, at the end of the strike, the Iranians will go to this place. They will not find anything. Everything will be destroyed. From my point of view, it's more important than which sector will be picked by the decision makers. The ability of Israel to show that we know how to totally destroy targets in Iran.
But some might wonder why, Israel keeps going after the proxies. You keep going after the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and not focus more on the organization, the country that funds all of those proxies, which is, of course, Iran. Do you think it's a mistake not to focus more on Iran than perhaps Israel has done up until this point? After all, the last strike was in April, and it didn't inflict particularly lasting damage on the country.
First, you have to remember, Iran is 1,500 kilometers from it. It's easy to speak. It's not as easy to implement. It's 1,500 kilometers from here. But it is a long argument in Israel. The question that you asked was asked many times by many decision makers and people from the from the circle in which decisions had been taken. My answer to those who ask the question that Iran without the proxies is much weaker Iran. Think about the situation in which Hezbollah is still strong, Hamas is still strong, and we are attacking Iran. Immediately we will see missiles coming from both Gaza and Lebanon, and we had to face something totally different. Today, when Hamas is out of the equation, is not relevant as a threat to Israel. It's relevant to the people of Gaza, to the soldiers of the IDF who are still cleaning Gaza, but not relevant as a threat to Israel. Now I ask the question, what will be the reaction of Hamas on Gaza for the annihilation of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran? Because Hamas is not relevant as a threat to Israel. And Hezbollah, after what we did to Hezbollah, is much less relevant. It's still relevant. It's what I said 16 days ago. Hezbollah is a strong organization, but much less relevant. And now when we are considering attack in Iran, we don't have to take into consideration the question or the problem of what we will face from Gaza and from Lebanon. What they have is much less than what they had before in their arsenal. So I think that the way to do it one by one, to degrade Hamas or to finish Hamas, to degrade Hezbollah, and then to apply all our resources into Iran, it's the right way to do it. This is the strategy that we had to adopt as a very little country. We are not a big country, remember. All the burden is in
sure.
We are less than 10 million people, out of them 7 are Jews. So the burden at the end is on 7 million people, and we have to deal with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with Iran, with the Houthis. So I said that I think that the decision to do it one by one and not in parallel in many fronts was the right decision.
You know Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu very well, don't you? You worked with him over the years. We've had quite a few people on this program in the last couple of days and weeks who've said he doesn't actually have a strategy. He's putting his political survival ahead of Israeli national interest. I'd like to ask what you make of comments like those.
I think it's, how to say it politely, it's a British media. I think there is no any connection between this description and the facts on the ground. Netanyahu was the prime minister which made the most important decision at the beginning of the war. First, we are focusing and we are going to eliminate Hezbollah. Hamas in Gaza. The second anchor of the strategy was 4 days later when he decided not to accept the offer of the security apparatus to begin a war in Lebanon, to attack in Lebanon. It was very tempting target, but he decided, no, we are focusing on one front. The third decision was part of this strategy that when we finish in Gaza, we are going to fight Hezbollah. He didn't have a clear plan. And what happened is an event of use it or lose it with the peoples. But it was clear, the three elements of his strategy are very clear. Elimination of Hamas, total elimination of Hamas, never was a target for the IDF since the establishment of the State of Israel. The second one was not two fronts in parallel. And the third was, after Hamas, we will take care for Hezbollah because we have to bring our citizens back home in the north part of Israel. If someone don't see the frame of this strategy, I'm really sorry, he doesn't understand what strategy means.
But you're saying start the Hezbollah operation once Hamas has been degraded. But Hamas hasn't been completely degraded. In fact, we're hearing that Hamas is regrouping in some parts of northern Gaza. So that strategy,
yes, but
is he really adhering to it?
Yes, but I think it's very minimal. I mean, as I said, no one asked the question, what will be the reaction of Hamas for the elimination of Haniya, the head of Hamas? What will be the reaction of Hamas to the elimination of Nasrallah? What is the contribution of Hamas to the war when Israel is very aggressive in Lebanon? Theoretically, they had to be more involved because to help Hezbollah, which decided to launch a war in the 8th of October to help Gaza. Where is Hamas now? Hamas is not relevant anymore as a threat to Israel. They can launch some rockets from time to time. But slowly, they will be annihilated, all of them. Why? They lost the ability to act as an organization. The organization system does not exist. They don't have the ability to manufacture in Gaza. They don't have the ability to smuggle to Gaza. They don't have the ability to move forces from one place to another. They don't have the ability to collect intelligence and to use it against us. Of course, it's as a guerrilla. When we are coming in the places in which they are under the ground somewhere, they try to kill our soldiers. But thank God, the numbers are 1 in every 2 weeks.
And yet, 27 people were killed in Gaza just today in Deir al-Balah at a school which was housing displaced people. That happened today, we understand. Israeli strike on a school in Deir al-Balah. So if there's no Hamas, why are attacks like that happening and killing 27 civilians?
No, because as you said, you told me, you asked me, Hamas is trying to regroup. When we identify an area, a place, a building, a school, a mosque in which they try to build the new seeds of the next Hamas, what you called regrouped, we are going there and kill them. We don't hesitate. There are still 1,000, I don't know, 20, 30,000 members of Hamas still exist in Gaza. Whenever they will try to regroup, either it will be in school or in open space or in a building somewhere in Khan Younis or Rafah or Gaza, and we will have the intelligence, we will bomb them, we will send ground forces to kill them. We are not hesitating. We have a year to clean Gaza. We know the situation. We didn't kill all of them yet, and we have a long way to go. But it is totally different organization. If the threat of Hamas was at the beginning of the war 100, today it's 20 or 10. But still, we have to continue and to be very determined and to insist that we have a job to do in Gaza. It's to eliminate all the terrorists of Hamas, all of them. They had been around 40, 45,000 people. We killed between 15 to 20. We have to kill the others, and if new will be recruited, we will kill the new as well. Hamas will not exist in Gaza in the future. It's not like Hezbollah that will remain in Lebanon, and we will have the job to keep it very low in its capabilities. Hamas will not exist.
How long are we talking? How long are we talking, General? Because this is my last question. We're nearly out of time. But how long? What sort of time frame?
I answer immediately. In the West Bank, in 2002, it took us 4 years to clean the area. We begin with 122 Israelis killed in 1 month by terrorists coming from the West Bank. It means 1,500 a year, 122 in 1 month in April 2002. In the spring of 2002, just not April, spring of 2002. And after 4 years, we succeeded to have averagely in the next 15 years, 15 people which had been killed. 1% of what we had in 2002. You can say you didn't finish with the terrorism. You had 15 people which had been killed every year. Yes, but if you compare it to what we had before the operation, it's 1%. I think that we should reach this situation in Gaza. We will be people from Hamas which try to kill Jews in the future. This is the character of the organization, to kill Jews.
So, General Amiral, you're saying that we could be a number of years away from a conclusion.
No, what I said, no, let me finish. In Gaza, unlike in the West Bank, it will take a year.
Another year.
It's more concentrated. It's not spread as it was in in the West Bank. We are now in a better situation controlling the area. So it will take probably another year. At the end of 2025, Hamas will remain a footnote in the books of the history of the Middle East.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us.
You are most welcome.
Yaakov Admiral, thank you very much indeed.
You are most welcome.
Well, for more analysis, I'm joined now by the defence analyst and former colonel in the British Army and former defence attaché in Kabul, Colonel Simon Diggins. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, Colonel Diggins. No end in sight, is there, to all the fighting in Gaza or Lebanon for that matter? And I'm just wondering, does it look to you as though Israel has started some forever wars that it's not going to be able to get out of anytime soon?
I think that's exactly where they are. I mean, they've had to respond to what they regard as existential threat, but they've chosen to conduct their operation in such a way that they didn't just deal with the initial threat, but they seem to take themselves into a place where, as you say, it's very hard for them to get out of it. They had their own internal security issues in the occupied West Bank. They went into Gaza to deal with Hamas. They've gone to southern Lebanon to deal with Hezbollah. Each of those operations, almost by itself, would absorb a huge amount of manpower and resources, and they don't have that. They are still essentially, well, very professional. They've also got reserve armies. They've then got the wider issues around the conflict with Iran, ongoing issues with the Houthis in the Red Sea, and then there's another one, if you like, another area of conflict, which is the Court of International Human Rights and public opinion. So the Israeli government at the moment has got itself not just caught on the horns of a dilemma, but is fighting, as you say, on many different fronts without necessarily the resources to actually finish one of them properly. And it does now look as though Netanyahu seems happy about this, and that's for his own internal political reasons, but we are heading towards something that looks like a sort of forever war.
Yes, it sounds like you think the Israelis have spread themselves rather thinly in terms of all these different conflicts that they're caught up in. Just looking at some of the specifics, 28 people killed today in an Israeli airstrike on a school sheltering displaced families in central Gaza. That's according to the Palestinian Red Crescent. I mean, one of the topics we've talked a lot to our guests about here on Al Arabiya News is this perceived lack of strategy on the part of Israel. Do you think Israel does have a strategy in Gaza, and if so, what is it?
I think the strategy is one that we find uncomfortable. The strategy is essentially to prevent the Palestinian people from establishing their own state. And I think that's something the West particularly has found difficult to understand. The official line, the official policy that's been in existence since at least 2000, but certainly since 2005, and the withdrawal of Israelis from Gaza. These are preliminary steps towards establishing a two-state solution. But in all of that period, from 2005 right the way through to 2024, bar 18 months, Bibi Netanyahu has been Israeli prime minister. And he's absolutely opposed, as is his party, Likud, and his right-wing coalition, to anything that looks like a two-state solution. And so, without wishing to overstate the point, I mean, they've done everything possible to ensure that Gaza was split off from the Fatah-controlled West Bank, separate organisations, dealt with them separately, undermined and subverted everything they're trying to do. So yes, he does have a strategy, but the strategy is not necessarily one that the West is comfortable with. In other words, it basically goes against what the international consensus is, which is there shall be a two-state solution dealing with Israel and Palestine. And therefore, what you do is you keep stirring the pot. You don't necessarily do it the whole time, but if an opportunity arises, as has arisen as a result of a horrendous attack by Hamas on October the 7th, you use that opportunity to, in Netanyahu's words, to rewrite the Middle East for a generation, to make new. So I think that's where his strategy is. So there's a huge gap between what the West think we're heading toward, which is a ceasefire, followed by some resolutions, followed by a sustainable peace, and actually what Netanyahu and his parties are trying to do, which is really directly opposed to that strategy.
Yes, it sounds like you're saying that the Israelis really want to seize this opportunity, the momentum they've had in recent weeks, these intelligence coups they've had, and that does seem to explain, doesn't it, the reluctance on the part of the Israelis to talk about diplomacy and talk about ceasefires.
No, they see this as once in generation opportunity. I mean, there is a sort of precedent to this, which is linked, I think, to some of them, which is, you know, the precedent arriving before George Bush took power in the US in 2000. He was sponsored by, yes, he was a Republican, but there was this whole grouping called the Project for the New American Century. And they talked about what they call the Pearl Harbor moment. They look for some event which would allow the US to project its power. And after the al-Qaeda attack on 9/11 in the US, you had Donald Rumsfeld being very honest and open about it, saying, let's wrap it all up at once, hence the attack on Iraq, as well as trying to deal with al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And I think this is what we've got here with Netanyahu. I mean, the conspiracy theorists can keep quiet. I mean, I don't think he orchestrated the October the 7th attack at all. I mean, they were clearly taken completely by surprise by what actually happened. But they saw the opportunity. The opportunity it's given them is the opportunity not just to destroy Hamas, but as it has done, to go after Hezbollah. And as he said last week, just after his visit to the UN, to try and deal with Iran as well. That's exactly what Rumsfeld tried to do after 9/11. He said, let's wrap it all up at once, all the issues in the Middle East. And I think that's what Netanyahu is trying to do. So when he talks about remaking the Middle East for generations, this is what he's trying to do. This is the opportunity he sees to try and do something very dramatic and change, if you like, the geopolitical calculus under which Israel sits.
We're going to be coming on to Iran in just a moment, and specifically how Israel responds to Iran's missile attack of 9 days ago. But before that, I just want to talk a little bit more about what's happening in Lebanon, because we understand from UNIFIL, the peacekeeping force, that Israel has been repeatedly hitting UN peacekeepers' positions in the last 24 hours. Two UNIFIL peacekeepers have been injured, we understand. This all sets some pretty dangerous precedents, doesn't it, for future conflicts around the world if Israel's allowed to do this? Why wouldn't other countries in the future take a similar course of action and perhaps
they show little or no respect for I agree entirely with them. They show little or no respect for UNIFIL and the United Nations. We should recognise what UNIFIL can and cannot do. I mean, it is at best a peacekeeping force. It's mandated to keep a peace, but clearly the peace no longer exists. Nonetheless, they do have some protection roles, and they've put themselves close to villages which otherwise would be extremely vulnerable. And that's what the Israelis are accusing them of doing, basically of hiding Hezbollah fighters behind, if like the UN flag. They show complete disrespect for the United Nations in Gaza. A significant number of UN personnel have been killed in Gaza, along with lots of other people as well. So yes, it is disrespectful to what they're doing, and I just think it's so utterly short-sighted, because Israel, at the end of the day, has got to make peace with the world. There's got to be a peace in which Israel has properly a right to exist. I absolutely support that. So, but that needs if you like, as I said, the court of international public opinion to say yes, we want Israel to exist and we support it. And disrespecting the one organisation, which, if you like, is a supranational organisation, the United Nations, is not helpful. And obviously extremely dangerous and worrying for the UN personnel and those who are looking after them as well.
And in terms of the time frame for the conflict in Lebanon, already it's been a year and 3 days in Gaza. I mean, yes, Hamas has been degraded significantly, but they do seem to be regrouping at the moment as well. Lebanon's a much more complicated country to do combat in, isn't it? Because of the terrain, there are mountains, there are borders, there's a sea border, and there is not just Hezbollah, there are other armed groups in Lebanon. And were they to join in with the perception that their country was being harmed by an external force to the extent that it is, I mean, we could be looking at a much larger, much more complicated conflict there in Lebanon than anything we saw in Gaza.
Yeah, and it has that potential. I mean, if you look at some more recent Israeli incursions into the Lebanon, they never ended up where they started off, and they all started off with the same kind of logic of precise targeted operations. In the 70s and early 80s, they were there, and through to 2000, they were targeted against the remnants of the PLO. After the Israeli occupation, the 1982 to 2000 occupation, Hezbollah arose in the south, and then they made an incursion in 2006 to try and do what they're doing now against Hezbollah, and had to withdraw after a month. But it's not an easy place for them. The terrain, as you say, is completely different. There's a network of villages that exists there, and you've got Beirut, which is a major international city with all the people in it as well. And so, the further Israel gets drawn into that, the more complicated it becomes, the more you need resources, because you get into a counterinsurgency phase of operations, and counterinsurgency just eats up troops because you need people not just to operate against insurgents, but you need to guard roads, you need to guard locations, maintain your supply routes and everything that goes with it. So it becomes very difficult to keep that kind of resource going, particularly for the Israelis at the moment, where they still have not achieved a level of peace or stalemate in Gaza at all. We saw again on the anniversary of October 7th, this October 7th, Hamas fired missiles again at Tel Aviv. So, that issue is not resolved either.
OK, let's talk now about the Israeli response to Iran. Obviously, we don't know what they're going to do yet, but it has been 9 days. So 9 days since the Iranian attack on Israeli territory. So first of all, what's taking so long? And second of all, when the Israeli defense minister says we're going to carry out a powerful, precise and above all surprising attack on Iran, what do you think the options are?
The two options, there's three major options in terms of targeting, but just to answer your general point first, the Israelis want to ensure that they, if you like, the message that Netanyahu publicly stated at the United Nations General Assembly, that we can reach anywhere inside Iran, is understood by the Iranians. And I think it also, they were expecting some response from Iran and the missile attacks that took place after the destruction, basically the decapitation of Hezbollah. The indications are they were probably more effective than the Israelis actually put out. So they will clearly want to ensure that the Iranians get the message in terms of what they're doing. In terms of the targeting, there's two major strands of thought here. The first gets back to this sense that this is the equivalent of the Pearl Harbor moment. In other words, this is the opportunity to remake the Middle East for generations. And Netanyahu has identified Iran as an existential threat to them, and therefore the targeting would be aimed at something which is strategic and has a direct effect. And that leads them to thinking about attacks on Iran's nuclear development facilities or significant attacks onto their wealth generating facilities, which obviously is based around oil and the oil infrastructure. So there is that sort of school of thought. Now, for both of those two target sets for those, Iran has said that would be a red line if they would cross them. And against both of those sets of targets, the US have advised the Israeli, we understand, not to do that, precisely because they don't want to escalate it any further. Which leaves a third set, which is a kind of, if you like, the measured, contained response, which would be equivalent to the sort of attack that Iran carried out on Israel. And Iran basically targeted military and intelligence facilities within Israel themselves. And the thinking might well be, the kind of, if you like, the purely rational thinking would be they would do something but dramatic and effective, no doubt, against those Iranian sort of facilities. So they'd go for sort of like an equivalent target set that the Iranians went for, perhaps more successful than the Iranians did, but they'd go for that sort of target set against Iran. But there is just that, and I think that's where the Americans would like them to go, but there is just that thought, there is just that kind of idea in the back of their minds that if you really are in the game of resetting the Middle East for generations, and you've identified Iran, if you like, as an existential threat to Israel, you do something which basically limits Iran's ability to be that existential threat. So that's, I think, why it's taken so long for them to decide what they're going to do. And I think that's where we are now. That's why we're all kind of in kind of watch and wait mode at the moment.
And just lastly, Colonel Diggins, we know that Benjamin Netanyahu and President Biden have spoken now on the telephone in the last couple of hours, in the last 24 hours, I should say. It's the first time they've spoken in weeks, isn't it? What do you read into the fact that these two leaders just don't seem to be speaking in a situation like the situation we're in right now?
Well, I think at a personal level, they loathe each other. I mean, that's, it's really straightforward. You may have seen some of the reviews of the latest book by Bob Woodward called War, where he's got, he's clearly been given really good access to the White House and the transcripts of the conversations between President Biden and Netanyahu. They're fairly blue. They're not, this is not polite. But I think it shows up much more, if you like, more generally, more substantively, what's missing from this war, which is the US has got limited or no ability at the moment to control what Israel does. looked back at history, and I've been doing some research into history as to how some Middle East wars finished in the past. And while, for example, the United States always supported Israel in its conflicts, its various conflicts over the years, it also acted as a restraining influence on them and prevented them from, if you like, so altering the balance of power in the Middle East that other countries would collapse. At the moment, there's no sign whatsoever that the US is doing that. Now, I think that's not a question of willpower. I think they very much like to control what Israel does. But Netanyahu is not listening, and for whatever reason, whatever levers of power the US might hold over Israel, they either can't be used or are not being used. And that's why we've got this very dangerous situation that we are having here. It's very hard to see what will control them, except perhaps war exhaustion on the behalf of Israel.
All right, I'm sorry to cut you short. I'm being told we're out of time. I really appreciate you, though, taking the time to speak to us. Colonel Simon Diggins, sorry to cut you off. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem at all. Good to talk to you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
New York. The Big Apple. The city that never sleeps. The most exciting in the world, New York, New York. Filled with restaurants, bars, museums, shopping destinations, and iconic sites, New York is indeed a welcoming city. A year-round destination with 4 seasons, New York is magical in the winter, with marvelous snowfalls and cloudless skies. In the spring and autumn, the city is at its best, with a crispness to the air and clear blue skies. The city is indeed filled with popular tourist spots. The most popular site is the Central Park, which transforms into a beautiful golden red in October. The Grand Central Terminal is known for its stunning historical feats. From its near destruction and restoration, the beauty of this famous Beaux Arts building is certainly a must-see. The Empire State Building, with its classic Art Deco architecture, is indeed a New York City icon. Its 102-story building is one of the most visited in the world. Visit the 86th floor outside Observatory for views of up to 80 miles or 130 kilometers that are definitely worth the photos. The Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, the world's largest performing arts center, is also home to 12 resident arts organizations, including the New York Philharmonic, Metropolitan Opera, the New York City Opera, and the New York City Ballet. Not to be missed are the world-class museums, the American Museum of Natural History, the Museum of Modern Art, and of course, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Times Square is yet another tourist spot to visit. In the middle of the bustling hive of activity, Times Square is known for its huge electronic billboards and many destinations for fun and activities. And finally, the reason why New York is called the city that never sleeps. The place offers endless nightlife options to choose from that makes it almost impossible to have time for sleep. There are after-dark nightclubs, bars, theaters, live music, and comedy performances to explore every day, be it the weekend or a night after work. New York is also known as the restaurant capital of the world. With more than 18,000 eateries to choose from, just imagine how difficult deciding where to eat will be. The most expensive but worthy dining hangouts can be found in Midtown Manhattan, where reservations at restaurants are actually the standard.
Mr. Gates, thanks for making the time, sir.
Good to talk to you.
Let's start with this new announcement you made here in Saudi Arabia. It's quite a large commitment that your foundation is doing in combination with the Saudi government. About 620 million?
That's right.
What prompted that collaboration?
Well, when I saw the Crown Prince last fall, I talked about the incredible effort to get rid of polio, to make sure no kid is ever paralyzed again. And I explained how that was a top priority for my foundation work. And he agreed to be a very strong partner. And so that's why the government announced 500 million of that will go over the next 5 years for polio eradication.
When you talk about a global threat like polio, what sort of difference will that kind of sum make, and which would be the areas in which you would target it?
Well, we have made a lot of progress with polio. We have 99% less cases than when the eradication started. But we still have polio in Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's never gotten to zero in those two countries. And it's spread back into Africa. And so our two challenges is to get it out of Africa while, for the first time, getting all the way to zero in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And that costs over $1 billion a year. And so if we do it well over these next 5 years, we'll be certified as the second major disease to be eradicated. Only smallpox has achieved that to date.
I was wondering, what was it about polio in particular that caught your attention first?
Well, polio is a terrible disease. You know, it paralyzes kids. And in a poor country, to be paralyzed like that it really is an awful thing. This eradication effort had started before the Gates Foundation was created. And it goes back to 1988 when Rotary, UNICEF, WHO, US CDC got together and said, let's go do this. As the effort was not going well around the year 2000, the Gates Foundation got involved. And now the three biggest donors are our foundation, the U.S. government, and now Saudi Arabia.
And that's interesting because the collaboration in the region has really grown. I know through the Lives and Livelihoods project, the fund, you have already collaborated quite significantly with a lot of other countries in this particular region. And I'm wondering to what degree that's kind of showing countries in this region starting to realize they can step up to the mark.
Well, it's been a great experience with the Lives and Livelihood Fund #1. And because that works well now, we're all making commitments to the second round of that. You know, the Islamic Development Bank understands the Muslim countries. They understand how to deliver. Our foundation understands health and agriculture. And so we take the expertise, we bring it together, and we pick these high-impact projects. So, you know, we're both excited to renew that work.
To what degree has that traditional model of the West largely being responsible for charity and donations switched now, in real terms, to have countries in the Middle East, to have countries in other parts of the world really get involved with collaboration? Are you really seeing that?
Well, I'd say that, you know, in terms of generosity, that's always been global. It's, you know, at the heart of the Christian and Muslim religion is that those who have a lot have a responsibility to give back. I'd say the new thing is to take this charitable money, whether from individuals or governments, and really be strategic, like creating a new vaccine or, you know, using a mapping approach to find all the children so we can get rid of polio and really measuring all the results. So with such limited money to help poor people, we have to make sure that it's being spent very, very well, both on health and education or all the things that can lift people up.
And I know there's a greater challenge. You don't get involved with political commentary, but what we do see in this day and age is some really severe impact of conflicts. We see what's happening in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, Congo, 3 decades of that. These kind of conflicts, how much do they set back your effort to have some major impact?
Well, the conflicts are such a terrible thing. The loss of life, the destruction of property. It also means that the ongoing effort to help poor countries gets pushed down. Africa's got a lot of poor countries, but less money is going there as urgent issues around these conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine are now taking those very limited dollars. And so, yes, it's the goals that the world has set, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to miss those because of a combination of first the pandemic and now all of this instability.
It's interesting you mentioned that because I was reading how when we do that very in-depth interview in March 2014 with Rolling Stone magazine, you gave your thoughts on a various bunch of issues from climate change and philanthropy, the state of America, and you said innovation is the real driver of progress at that time, and that America is way better today than it's ever been. Now, considering what we've seen in terms of China making so much progress, especially in technology, the serious competition is created for the US, and of course the current state of politics, would you still make that statement now?
Well, certainly China's done a lot of very impressive things in manufacturing, high-speed rail, but in terms of overall innovation, the U.S. is still unequaled. If you leave the country you're born in to go work with the best people in a subject area, mostly you're going to U.S. institutions. And so that's meant whether it's medicine or AI, the U.S. still has a lead there, even though these technologies fortunately get distributed globally and will benefit the entire world.
There's something else that caught me in that interview too. You said, asked about your greatest fear looking 50 years ahead. You said there will be some really bad things that will happen in the next 50 to 100 years, but hopefully none of them on the scale of, say, 1 million people that you wouldn't expect to die from a pandemic or nuclear or bioterrorism. And a few years, of course, later we saw the COVID-19 pandemic. I think the estimates are nearly 3.5 million or something close to what it's taken. And I wonder how your views on the risks have changed when you look at that. I mean, you're fighting very hard to get that 1%, for example, with polio, and then you have all these other things that might be impinging on it.
Well, overall, the progress in health is phenomenal. Most people don't know we've gone from over 10 million children under 5 dying every year to now we're under 5 million. And so even though that's plateaued out with the pandemic and instabilities, it's something we can be very proud of. We got all these new vaccines out to the world's children, and that is the primary reason we were able to cut the deaths so much. Now we need to get back to cutting it in half again, but the financial situation, the instabilities meant that we're moving a lot more slowly than I would hope. I had predicted there was a risk of a pandemic, and sadly, that came true. We're past that. Now we need to get people working together in partnership and taking innovation and applying it to help the very poorest in the world.
And so much has changed in the past 2 decades, perhaps even the past few years in terms of media. Is the media, now we've got social media, of course, in the mix, is it your friend or enemy now?
Well, certainly I work with the media to get the good news out about how we've reduced deaths and where there's challenges. And, I want citizens of generous countries to feel proud of the work they're doing. Saudis should feel proud. Now they're on the polio eradication team. We need more of that generosity. And so the media is the way that we help people learn about it.
And of course, it's, you must get really frustrated with all the conspiracy theories. They just never seem to go. Do you think you'll ever get over those? They say, about vaccinations and chips and so on.
Well, up until the pandemic, I hadn't thought of that as a big phenomenon. I was completely taken by surprise at those conspiracies, and some of them centered on me, and some of them were, exactly the opposite of the truth. Vaccines have saved more lives than any other tool, and yet they came under attack.
Now, of course, there's little doubt about what you've achieved for the world in terms of technology and access for the average person to computing and computing power. It changed the relationship people have with computers, for example. Now, of course, we have AI on the scene. What are your regards with that? I mean, is it a risk that keeps you awake at night?
Well, AI is both the most promising and the most challenging advance humanity has ever made. A friend of mine, Mustafa Suleiman, wrote a book called The Coming Wave that, says that we can take advantage of this, improving health and education, but we have to make sure people with negative intent aren't taking these tools and using it for attacks.
You've managed to achieve something quite remarkable in this region now, getting people to come on board with the eradication of polio and paying attention to these issues. To what degree has your call for the super wealthy to really step up as well, to really make something with the resources they have, how well has that been responded to by these people?
Well, we have a number of people in this region who are members of the Giving Pledge, where you submit to give over half your wealth away. We don't have all the billionaires, so we need to work to convince them to come on board and find that their philanthropy can be super fulfilling and have a huge impact.
Is it possible to be too wealthy?
No, I feel lucky that I have so many resources, that we can go after very ambitious goals, malaria, TB, HIV, it's very fulfilling work.
The work you've done over the past 24 years since you started the foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you've spent about $50 billion, I think, now on health education, poverty alleviation, and so on. What do you feel personally is the biggest achievement of the foundation?
Well, certainly the work we've done in health. We helped create lots of new vaccines. We were founder of the Global Alliance for Vaccines that buys them for the children in the poor countries. We're founder of what's called the Global Fund that does amazing work on malaria, HIV, and TB. And so it's through collaborative efforts like that, or the coalition doing the polio eradication, that we've been able to have far greater impact than I ever expected we would.
Where does it go from here, Mr. Gates? So you've got the announcement now made. What are the next steps? What do you hope will happen next?
Well, it's great. Saudi Arabia and the other countries in this region are helping with our dialogue with Pakistan, Afghanistan, how we execute and get the vaccines out to all those kids. So we need to get this one done. It'll be a monumental event. Once we succeed, we'll go on to go after other diseases like measles and malaria, which are also quite horrific.
You seem to remain optimistic.
No, I'm definitely optimistic. We have innovation on our side. We have, human generosity, the fact that people do want to help other people. And so it's incredible work.
I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Honolulu, a journey that'll give you history, food trips, and adventure. But more than anything, Honolulu offers you nature at its best. One of the most famous is Waikiki, the beachfront neighborhood of Honolulu and the most touristy area in town. Occupying a long stretch of the coast on the south shore of Honolulu, Waikiki's got a strip of high-rise hotels and resorts lining the beach. Other famous spots on the historical side include the Lolani Palace, a historical landmark in downtown Honolulu, originally built in 1879. Pearl Harbor is also considered a memorial attraction in Honolulu. Meanwhile, the local Hawaiian cuisine is certainly a thing to try. Then there's a Honolulu's Chinatown for fresh produce. The busy market section of Honolulu smells of fresh fruits and veggies and meat and fish. Here you can buy produce at great prices. And finally, here are Honolulu's well-known nature trips. The Hanayuma Bay is one of the most famous places on the entire island for snorkeling. It's a nature reserve and marine sanctuary. Hiking is one of the best things to do in Honolulu. There are quite a few good hikes right in the Honolulu area. Some of them a bit outside of the city limits, but others are just right in the city. Take your pick. Then, of course, there's the Diamond Head, which is the iconic former volcano that's an emblem of travelers visiting Honolulu. People often like to take photos with it as a backdrop, but the view is in fact so much better when you're on top of it. Then, there's the Manoa Falls that offers a lush green jungle hike. It's a good way to appreciate the greenery and plants and trees of Hawaii. The north shore of Oahu is also great for surfing, or try the bodyboard, stand-up paddleboard, and other ocean activities. And then there's the Honolulu Zoo that's home to 905 different animals. Along with the diversity of different animals at the Honolulu Zoo, also neatly designed with many different lush tropical gardens. And finally, the Waikiki Aquarium is a good place to learn about the marine life of Hawaii.